Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. It was a Saturday in late August. One of those hot, hazy days where the air feels thick and the sunlight has that golden, heavy quality to it. My wife and I had been cooped up all week with work, and our friend had just gotten a new four-wheeler. He was itching to take it out, and we were happy for an excuse. We decided to head out to the Slabtown Spring area. It's not a place you just stumble upon. You have to mean to go there. It's a solid hour and a half of driving on paved roads before you even hit the dirt forest service roads, and then it's another 45 minutes of bumping along, dust clouding up behind you. We packed a cooler with some beers and sandwiches, threw some extra gas in a can in the truck bed, and just went. The mood was light, you know, just a bunch of friends getting out of town for the afternoon. I was driving my truck, my wife in the passenger seat, and our friend was following us on his four-wheeler. We finally got to a decent spot to unload our own four-wheeler from the trailer. From there, it was just the three of us on two machines, puttering deeper into the woods. The area around Slabtown Spring it's wild. It feels old. The trees are mostly tall ponderosa pines, but they're spread out enough that you can see a good distance in some places. The ground is covered in that dry, slippery pine needle carpet. And there are these huge granite cliffs that just shoot up out of nowhere, and right through the middle of it all is the big piney river. It's not a huge river, but it's fast-moving and cold, carving its way through these sheer rock walls. The sound of it is a constant background noise, a low rush that fills the silence. We'd been riding for maybe an hour, just exploring trails, crossing shallow parts of the river, getting sprayed with cold water. It was getting on toward late afternoon. The sun was dipping lower, starting to throw long, deep shadows from the trees. The light was turning that incredible orange-purple color, and the temperature was beginning to drop. You could feel the day starting to wind down. We came around a bend, and the trail opened up into this beautiful little meadow. It was maybe the size of a couple of football fields, ringed by trees on three sides. But on the fourth side was one of those massive cliffs, just a sheer rock face that went straight up a couple 100 feet. The river ran along the base of it. The meadow was full of wild grass and a few late-season wildflowers, all bathed in that warm, late-day sun. It was so peaceful, it almost didn't feel real. We killed the engines. The sudden quiet was heavy. All you could hear was the river and the faint buzz of insects. We were just sitting there for a minute, taking it in, drinking some water. I remember swinging my leg off the four-wheeler and just stretching, my back popping in a couple places. I was looking around, just admiring the view, feeling pretty damn lucky to be in such a spot. My wife and our friend were chatting about something, I don't even remember what. I was only half listening. My eyes were scanning the cliff face across the meadow. It was pockmarked with holes and crevices, dark shadows where the rock had split and eroded over who knows how many thousands of years. It was then, as my gaze drifted from left to right, that I saw it. About 2/3 of the way up the cliff there was a dark, vertical crack, an opening in the rock. It wasn't a cave, more like a narrow slit, maybe tall enough for a person to stand in if they were sideways. And sticking out of that opening, from about the elbow down, was an arm. My brain didn't process it at first. It was just a shape, a wrong shape. I remember my eyes kind of slid past it and then snapped back. I froze. I didn't breathe. The arm was covered in hair. Not like a bear's fur, which is more of a coat. This was long, shaggy, dark brown hair, almost black in the shadow of the crevice. It looked dense, like the hair on a buffalo. The arm itself was thick, way thicker than a man's arm. It was muscular, but not in a bodybuilder way. It was a powerful, utilitarian thickness, like the limb of something that spent its life hauling its own weight up and down cliffs. The hand, or what I could see of it, was huge. I couldn't make out individual fingers clearly from that distance, but the whole thing was just massive, resting against the rock outside the hole. It was utterly still. I must have stared for a full 5 seconds, my mind just screaming static. This isn't right. This isn't anything. What is that? And then it moved. It wasn't a big movement. It was a subtle shift, a slight tightening of the muscles in the forearm. It was the kind of movement you make when you're holding a position and you adjust your grip. A living movement. And in that instant, I knew. I knew it was looking at me. I felt it. It was like a physical jolt, a current of pure awareness passing between us across that meadow. It knew I had seen it. The second it realized I was looking, the arm whipped back into the darkness of the crevice. It was unbelievably fast. There was no hesitation, no slow retreat. 1 second it was there, a solid physical thing, and the next second the rock face was empty. Just a dark, silent slit in the granite. The speed of it was what terrified me the most. It was a blur, something that big shouldn't be able to move that fast. I sucked in a sharp breath, a gasp that was loud in the quiet. My heart was suddenly hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful pounding. My skin went cold and then hot, a wave of prickling heat washing over me. "Did you see that?" I blurted out, my voice sounding too high, strained. My wife and our friend turned to look at me. They had been facing the other way, looking at the tree line. "See what?" my wife asked. "On the cliff, up there," I pointed, my hand trembling. There was an arm, a huge, hairy arm sticking out of that hole. They both squinted up at the cliff face. The friend chuckled. "Yeah, right, an arm like a bear." "It wasn't a bear," I said, my voice tight. I was still staring at the spot, half expecting it to reappear. It was an arm, it had a hand. It pulled back inside. My wife smiled, one of those patient, humoring smiles. "Okay, honey, sure it did." "I'm not joking." The desperation in my own voice surprised me. It was right there. It moved. It saw me looking, and it pulled back in. They both looked at each other and then back at me, their expressions a mix of amusement and mild concern. Our friend said, "Dude, it's probably just a shadow. The light's getting weird. You're seeing things." I felt a surge of frustration, mixed with a cold, growing dread. They didn't get it. They hadn't seen it. They didn't feel that jolt of mutual recognition. I kept staring at the hole, my eyes aching from not blinking. Nothing. It was just a dark crack in a rock wall. But I knew with a certainty that felt like a stone in my gut, that something had been in there, something intelligent, something that knew it had been spotted and didn't want to be. The peaceful atmosphere of the meadow was gone. Now it felt oppressive. The tall grass that had seemed so beautiful now felt like it could be hiding anything. The forest around us felt like a wall, closing in. The sound of the river, which had been soothing, now sounded like it was masking other sounds. Every little snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me flinch. I couldn't take my eyes off that cliff. I started scanning the entire rock face, looking for any other openings, any signs of movement. My mind was racing. What was it? Where did it go? Was it still in there? Was it watching us from a different hole? The cliff was full of them. It could be anywhere. "Can we go?" I said, my voice quieter now. "I really think we should go." My wife's smile faded. She could see I was genuinely spooked. "What's wrong?" "You're white as a sheet." I don't feel good. I think I'm getting a headache from the sun." It was a lame excuse, but it was the best I could do. I couldn't explain the sheer, primal fear that was coursing through me. It was a deep, instinctual terror, the kind you feel when you're not at the top of the food chain. Our friend shrugged. "Sure, man. We can head back. Sun'll be down soon anyway." We got back on the four-wheelers. I was driving and I gunned it probably a little too hard, spinning the tires in the soft dirt. I didn't care. I just wanted to be out of that meadow. I led the way back, driving faster than I should have, taking the corners too tight. I kept checking the rearview mirror on the four-wheeler, half expecting to see some huge, dark shape loping after us through the trees. I saw nothing but our friend's headlights and swirling dust. The whole ride back to the truck, my mind was replaying those few seconds over and over, the texture of the hair, the way the light hit the muscular curve of the forearm, the impossible speed of its retreat. It wasn't clumsy. It wasn't animalistic in a dumb way. It was precise, aware. We loaded the four-wheeler back onto the trailer in a hurry. The sun was almost gone, and the woods were getting dark fast. The drive home was mostly quiet. My wife asked if I was feeling better, and I just nodded. Our friend made a couple more jokes about me seeing Bigfoot, but they fell flat. I couldn't laugh. I just stared out the window at the passing trees, seeing that dark slit in the cliff every time I closed my eyes. I didn't sleep well that night. Every noise from outside the house made me tense up. I'd lie there in the dark, listening, my heart thumping, that image of the arm seared into my mind. For years, I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? The police? The Forest Service? Hey, I saw a big hairy arm in a cliff. They'd have thought I was insane, or worse, they'd have believed me and sent people out there with guns and cameras. The thought of that made me feel sick. This thing, whatever it was, had been hiding. It was up in a nearly inaccessible cliff face, watching from the shadows. It didn't threaten us. It didn't make a sound. It just observed. And when it was seen, it vanished. I didn't want to be the reason a bunch of guys with rifles went looking for it. I didn't want to be the reason it got chased, or shot, or put in a cage. The feeling I'd had in that meadow wasn't just fear. It was a profound sense of having trespassed. We were in its place, so I kept it to myself. It became my secret, a weird, terrifying memory I'd turn over in my head sometimes when I was alone. It's been many years now. The forest changes, logging operations, fires, new roads being cut. I've tried to find that meadow a couple of times, but I never have. Maybe the trail's grown over. Maybe I'm remembering the landmarks wrong. Part of me thinks it's better that way. I don't need to see it again. I don't need proof. I've come to believe in my gut that it was a Bigfoot. I know how that sounds. I'm a normal guy. I work an office job. I pay my taxes. I don't believe in ghosts or aliens, but this was real. It was a physical thing made of muscle and hair and bone, and it was smart enough to hide and smart enough to know it had been seen. The memory of it still lingers, not as a nightmare, but as this heavy, unresolved mystery. I was just a guy on a four-wheeler on a Saturday afternoon, and for a few seconds, the world pulled back a curtain and showed me something I was never supposed to see. I looked into the shadows, and something in the shadows looked back, and then it was gone. Story 2. Okay, so this happened to me and my husband Cameron just a few weeks ago, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. We'd been planning this little getaway for months, just a chance to unwind from work and spend some time together without all the noise of the city. We picked this bed and breakfast in Clarksville, Missouri, because it looked cozy online, and we both love small towns and the quiet of the countryside. I remember driving there, the roads getting narrower and the trees thicker, and feeling that mix of excitement and relief you get when you're finally on vacation. We arrived in the afternoon, maybe around 3 o'clock. The B&B was this old, charming house with a big porch and a view of cornfields stretching out behind it. It was peaceful, the kind of place where you can hear birds chirping and the wind rustling through the crops. We checked in, and the manager, this older guy with a calm demeanor, showed us to our room. He was friendly but quiet, not the type to chat too much, which was fine by us. We unpacked, settled in, and spent the rest of the day just relaxing. We walked around the property a bit, took some photos of the cornfields because they looked almost golden in the late sun, and then had a simple dinner at a local diner. Everything felt normal, you know, like any other quiet trip. But as night fell, things started to change. It wasn't anything obvious at first. We were back in our room, maybe around 9 o'clock, just reading and chatting, when I started to hear these weird sounds outside. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe some animal. We're in the country after all. But then it got louder. It was this whooping noise, kind of like a high-pitched yell, but deeper, and it didn't sound like any bird or coyote I'd ever heard. It was eerie, the way it echoed across the fields. Cameron heard it too. He paused his reading and looked at me, his eyebrows furrowed. "What is that?" he whispered, and I just shook my head. We both got up and went to the window. The room had a big window that overlooked the cornfield, and we pulled back the curtains slowly. It was pitch black out there with only a sliver of moon, so we couldn't see much at first. But then another whoop came, closer this time, and it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just the sound, it was the way it felt, like something big was out there, something that didn't belong. We stood there for what felt like ages, just listening, and then we saw movement in the corn. At first, I thought it was my eyes playing tricks, but Cameron pointed and said, "There, look." And that's when we saw it. This figure standing at the edge of the cornfield. It was tall, way taller than a person, and it had these broad, wide shoulders that made it look massive. It was wearing what looked like a trench coat, but that didn't make sense. Why would someone be out in a cornfield in a trench coat at night? The coat was dark, almost blending into the shadows, but the shape was unmistakable. It was just standing there, not moving, and I felt this knot tighten in my stomach. My heart started beating faster, and I could feel Cameron's hand on my arm, his grip tightening. We didn't say anything for a minute, just stared, trying to make sense of it. Then out of nowhere, the figure let out this bellow. It wasn't a roar like in movies. It was deeper, guttural, like the sound came from its chest and shook the air around us. I swear I felt it in my bones, this vibration that made the window pane rattle slightly. The sound was so powerful, so raw, that I instinctively stepped back, my breath catching in my throat. Cameron pulled me closer, and we both froze, watching as the figure suddenly moved. It sprinted away into the cornfield, and that's when the real terror hit me. I've never seen anything move that fast. It wasn't human. No person could run like that, especially not through thick corn stalks. It was like a blur, this dark shape cutting through the field with impossible speed, the corn swaying and cracking as it went. In seconds, it was gone. But the sound of its movement lingered, this rustling, crashing noise that faded into the distance. The whole thing probably lasted less than 10 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. My legs felt weak, and I had to sit down on the edge of the bed. Cameron was still at the window, his face pale, and he kept muttering, "What the hell was that?" We stayed like that for a while, just trying to calm down. My hands were shaking, and I could feel sweat on my forehead, even though the room was cool. We debated whether to go outside or call someone, but honestly, we were too scared. What if it was still out there? What if it came back? After a few minutes, we heard footsteps on the porch, and we both jumped. It was the manager knocking on our door. He must have heard the noise or seen us at the window. When we opened it, he had this calm expression, like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Everything all right?" he asked, and we just stared at him for a second before Cameron blurted out what we'd seen. The manager listened, nodded slowly, and then said, almost casually, "Oh, that's probably one of the Sasquatches. They're around here sometimes." He said it like he was talking about raccoons or deer, not some mythical creature. I remember my jaw dropping. Cameron and I exchanged looks. Were we hearing this right? The manager went on to explain that locals have reported sightings for years, big hairy things that move fast and make those whooping sounds. He didn't seem scared or even surprised. It was just a fact of life for him. We spent the next hour or so talking to him, asking questions, but he didn't have much more to say. He told us to not wander out at night and that they usually don't bother people. But all I could think about was that thing we saw. Its size, its speed, the way it roared. If it wanted to, it could easily overpower anyone. The thought made my skin crawl. We decided to leave first thing in the morning. Neither of us could sleep after that. We packed our bags slowly, the silence between us heavy with unspoken fear. The next part is what really sticks with me. As we were getting ready to go, around sunrise, we stepped outside to load the car. The cornfield was quiet now, bathed in early morning light, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We saw footprints in the mud near the edge of the field, huge, deep impressions that didn't look human. They were too big, too far apart, like whatever made them was taking massive strides. I took a photo with my phone, but it doesn't do it justice. Standing there, looking at those prints, I felt this cold dread wash over me. It was real. We hadn't imagined it. We got in the car and drove away, both of us quiet for most of the ride. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us. Cameron finally broke the silence, saying how fascinated he was by the whole thing, but I could tell he was unnerved too. Me, I just felt scared, not just of what we saw, but of not knowing what it was. Was it really a Sasquatch or something else? The manager's casual mention made it seem possible, but my mind kept racing with questions. Why was it wearing a trench coat? That part doesn't fit with any Bigfoot stories I've heard, and it makes the whole thing even creepier. Since then, I've gone over it in my head 100 times. The whooping sounds, the figure in the corn, that roar, it all feels like a nightmare, but I know it happened. I've looked up accounts online, and there are similar stories, but none exactly like ours. The speed, the coat, the way it just vanished. I can't explain it. Sometimes at night I'll hear a noise outside, and my heart will start pounding all over again. Cameron thinks we should go back someday to investigate, but I don't think I ever could. That day, that one day, was enough to change how I see the world. It's left me with this lingering fear, this curiosity that gnaws at me, and no answers. I just keep wondering what else is out there hiding in the dark. Beat Story 3. It was one of those days that started out perfectly normal, the kind where you don't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen. My wife and I had spent the morning and early afternoon at Keno Hill, just enjoying the scenery and having a little picnic. We'd packed a thermos of coffee because we both love a hot drink when we're out in the fresh air, and the weather was cool but not cold, with a bit of a breeze that made the leaves rustle in a way that felt peaceful. We were driving back home in our old pickup truck, the kind that's seen better days, but still gets you where you need to go. I was behind the wheel and my wife was in the passenger seat, both of us feeling relaxed and tired from the day out. The road was mostly empty, just us and the trees lining either side, thick and dark in the late afternoon light. We'd been on the road for about an hour when I realized we'd left the thermos in the back of the truck. It was one of those metal ones with a red lid, and we'd used it earlier but must have set it down when we were loading up to leave. My wife mentioned she was feeling a bit thirsty, and I thought, why not pull over and grab it? We weren't in any hurry, and the spot we were in seemed as good as any. A wide shoulder on the side of the road with the woods stretching out behind it. I eased the truck onto the gravel, the tires crunching under us, and turned off the engine. The sudden silence was almost eerie, but in a calm way. You could hear the wind whispering through the pines and the occasional bird call, but otherwise it was quiet. I got out of the truck, stretching my legs a little. My wife stayed inside, rolling down her window to let in some air. "I'll just be a minute," I said, and she nodded, giving me a tired smile. I walked around to the back of the truck, where the bed was covered with a tarp we used for hauling stuff. I lifted it and saw the thermos tucked near the tailgate, right where we'd left it. As I reached for it, I felt this odd urge to look around, like something was off. Not in a scary way at first, just a feeling that we weren't alone. I shrugged it off, thinking it was just the isolation getting to me, but then I heard a rustling sound from deeper in the woods, something heavier than a squirrel or a bird. It caught my attention, and I figured maybe it was a deer or something. I've always been curious about wildlife, so I decided to take a quick peek. I told my wife I was just going to step into the trees for a second to see what it was. She didn't seem worried, just said, "Don't go too far." And I promised I wouldn't. I left the thermos in the truck bed for a moment and started walking toward the edge of the woods. The ground was soft under my boots, covered in pine needles and dead leaves. The air smelled damp and earthy, with a hint of decay that's common in forests. I pushed through a low-hanging branch and stepped into the shade of the trees. It was darker in there, with the canopy blocking out a lot of the sunlight, and my eyes took a second to adjust. I could still hear the rustling, and it was coming from maybe 50 feet away, behind a thicket of bushes. I moved slowly, trying not to make too much noise. My heart was beating a little faster than usual, but I put it down to excitement. As I got closer, the smell got stronger, a foul, rotting odor that made my nose wrinkle. It was like something had died recently, and the thought crossed my mind that it might be an animal carcass. I peeked around the bushes, and that's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear, a big black-furred bear, hunched over something on the ground. It was tearing into what looked like a deer carcass, its head down, and I could hear the wet, tearing sounds of flesh being ripped apart. The sight was gruesome, but I've seen bears before, so I wasn't too alarmed. I figured I'd just watch for a minute and then back away quietly, but something felt wrong almost immediately. The shape of it was off. It was bulkier than any bear I'd ever seen, and the fur was longer and shaggier, almost like thick wool. It was focused on eating, but I noticed its arms were longer too, and it was using them in a way that seemed more deliberate, like it had hands instead of paws. I stayed frozen, my breath caught in my throat. I could feel the cold seeping into my bones, even though it wasn't that cold out. My palms were sweating, and I wiped them on my jeans without thinking. I was about to turn and leave when the creature suddenly stopped eating and lifted its head. That's when everything changed. It wasn't a bear. I knew it in an instant, a gut-deep certainty that made my stomach clench. Its face was flatter, with dark eyes that seemed to gleam in the dim light, and it had a broader, more human-like structure, but covered in that same black fur. It turned its head slowly, and I swear it looked right at me. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst out. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. Then it started to rise. It pushed itself up from the ground, and I watched in horror as it straightened to its full height. It was massive, towering over me, easily 8 or 9 feet tall. Its shoulders were wide and powerful, and it stood on 2 legs like a person, but with a stance that was all wrong, too fluid and animal-like. The terror hit me like a physical blow. I felt dizzy, my vision narrowing to just this thing in front of me. It didn't make a sound at first, just stared at me with those dark eyes. Then it raised its arms, not in a threatening way initially, but more like it was stretching or testing the air. The arms were long and muscular, ending in what looked like thick fingers or claws. I could see the muscles ripple under the fur as it moved. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like jelly. I was rooted to the spot, watching as it took a step toward me. That's when it started waving its arms, not wildly, but in a slow, deliberate motion, like it was trying to communicate or scare me off. At the same time, it stomped one of its feet on the ground, a heavy thud that I felt through the soles of my boots. The sound was deep and resonant, vibrating in my chest. I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt like an eternity. Every instinct told me this thing was dangerous, that it could easily tear me apart if it wanted to. The smell of rot mixed with its own musky scent filled the air, making me want to gag. I finally managed to take a step back, my legs trembling so badly I almost fell. The creature took another step forward, and that's when I broke. I dropped to the ground, crawling backward on my hands and knees, not caring about the dirt or the branches scratching at me. I kept my eyes on it, afraid to look away. It didn't chase me, but it followed my movement, still waving its arms and stomping every few seconds. The sound of its stomps echoed in my ears, each one making me flinch. Crawling through the underbrush was slow and painful. Twigs snapped under my hands, and I could feel rocks digging into my knees, but I didn't dare stand up. I was too scared it would see me as a threat and charge. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I could taste the fear in my mouth, metallic and sour. I glanced back toward the road, but the trees blocked my view. All I could see was this creature standing there, its massive form silhouetted against the darker woods behind it. It was still making those movements, almost like a dance, but there was nothing playful about it. It felt aggressive, like a warning. I don't know how I made it back to the truck. It felt like I crawled for miles, but it was probably only a minute or two. When I finally broke through the tree line, I scrambled to my feet and ran the last few yards. My wife saw me coming, and her eyes went wide with alarm. I must have looked like a mess. Covered in dirt, face pale, breathing like I'd run a marathon. I yanked open the driver's door and practically fell into the seat. "Drive! Just drive!" I shouted, my voice cracking. She didn't ask questions, just turned the key and slammed the truck into gear. As we pulled away, I looked back and saw the thermos still sitting in the truck bed, forgotten in the panic. We left it there, and I didn't care. All I could think about was getting away. We drove in silence for what felt like forever. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the steering wheel tight to keep them steady. My wife kept glancing at me, but she didn't say anything until we were miles down the road. "What happened?" she finally asked, her voice quiet and scared. I tried to explain, but the words came out in a jumble. I told her about the creature, how it wasn't a bear, how it stood up and waved its arms. She listened, her face growing paler with each word. We both knew we'd seen something we couldn't explain, something that didn't belong in our world. The rest of the drive was a blur. We didn't stop until we got home, and even then, we just sat in the truck for a long time, not talking. The image of that thing is burned into my mind, the way it moved, the sound of its stomps, the smell. I keep thinking about how close I was, how it could have easily grabbed me if it wanted to. We never went back for that thermos, and I doubt I'll ever set foot near those woods again. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that we stumbled into something ancient and terrifying, something that's still out there, waiting. Story 4. Okay, so this happened back on January 2nd, 2006. I remember the date because it was just after New Year's, and we were driving back from visiting some relatives in the interior. We live in British Columbia, not far from Seine, which is this tiny spot on the map, more of a general area than a town, really. It's all forests and mountains out there, the kind of place where you can drive for miles and not see another soul. My wife and I had our 2 kids with us, both young, around 6 and 8 years old at the time. We'd been on the road for a couple of hours, and the kids were getting restless, so we decided to pull off near this trail we sometimes stop at to stretch our legs. It's nothing special, just a gravel pullout with a path leading into the woods, but it's usually quiet and peaceful. That day, though, things felt different right from the start. The air was cold, not just winter cold, but that sharp, biting cold that makes your lungs ache when you breathe in. Snow was everywhere, not deep, but enough to cover the ground in a thin, crunchy layer. The sky was overcast, this dull gray that made everything feel muted, like the world was holding its breath. We pulled the truck off the main road onto the gravel, and the tires crunched loudly in the silence. I remember thinking how quiet it was, unnaturally quiet, like all the birds and animals had just vanished. As soon as we stepped out of the truck, it happened. We heard this noise from the trees, and I swear my blood went cold in an instant. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. A loud, high-pitched screaming sound, but deep and forceful, like it was coming from something huge. It wasn't a coyote yip or a cougar's cry. I've heard those before, living out here. This was different. It sounded almost human, but not quite, with this raw, primal edge, that made the hair on my arm stand up. It echoed through the woods, bouncing off the trees, and for a second we all just froze. My brain was scrambling, trying to make sense of it, slot it into something normal like a bear or a big cat, but it didn't fit. Nothing fit. My son, who was 8 then, he's always been into cryptid stuff, you know, Bigfoot, aliens, all that. He'd watched videos online of supposed Sasquatch screams, and his eyes went wide. He grabbed my arm and whispered, "Dad, that's it, that's what I saw online." His voice was shaky, and I could feel his hand trembling. My wife, she went pale. She clutched our younger kid close, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She's not one to panic easily, but this got to her. The sound kept going, this piercing scream that felt like it was drilling into my skull. It was so loud, like it was right there in the trees, maybe 50 yards away, but we couldn't see anything through the thick pines and firs. I'll admit, part of me was curious, stupid, I know, but I've always been the type to want to see things for myself. I had a camera in the truck, one of those old digital ones, and I thought, maybe I could get a shot, something to prove what we were hearing, but my wife wasn't having it. She said, "We need to get back in the truck now. The kids are scared." She was right, of course. Our younger one was crying softly, and my son was just staring into the woods like he was hypnotized. The screaming kept up, rising and falling, and it felt like it was getting closer. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Reluctantly, we bundled the kids back into the truck. The interior was cold and the seats felt like ice. I helped buckle them in, my hands fumbling with the straps because I was shaking. My wife was in the driver's seat, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. I told her I was going to take a quick look, just a few steps down the trail with the camera. She begged me not to, said it wasn't safe, but I insisted. I think part of me didn't want to admit how scared I was. I grabbed the camera from the glove compartment and stepped out again. The air felt even colder now, like it had dropped a few degrees in those few minutes. The snow crunched under my boots as I walked toward the trailhead. The screaming was still going, but it seemed a bit farther away, or maybe I was just hoping it was. I took about 30 steps down the trail, my breath fogging in front of me. The trees were thick here, their branches heavy with snow, and the light was dim, making everything look shadowy and distorted. I could feel every sense on high alert, the cold on my face, the smell of pine and damp earth, the sound of my own breathing too loud in my ears. I raised the camera, trying to peer into the woods, but I couldn't see anything moving, just stillness and that awful screaming. Then, out of nowhere, the truck horn blared. It wasn't a quick beep. It was this long, continuous blast that cut through the silence like a knife. I jumped, my heart slamming against my ribs. The screaming stopped instantly. Just like that, it was gone, as if someone had flipped a switch. The sudden silence was almost worse. It felt heavy, oppressive. I stood there for a second, frozen, before turning and hurrying back toward the truck. My legs felt weak, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something coming out of the trees. When I got back, my wife was in the driver's seat, her face pale. She said she'd accidentally leaned on the horn, but the way she said it, I wasn't sure. Her hands were shaking, and she couldn't look me in the eye. I think she did it on purpose, to scare whatever was out there or to hurry me back. I didn't push it, though. I just got in the passenger seat, my own hands trembling. The kids were quiet now, wide-eyed. I tried to play it cool, said something like, "Probably just a coyote or something got spooked by the horn." But my son, he shook his head. "That wasn't a coyote, Dad," he said, his voice small. He believed it was a Sasquatch, and honestly, in that moment, I did too. We drove away, the gravel crunching under the tires. The inside of the truck felt claustrophobic, like the walls were closing in. I kept looking out the window, scanning the trees, but everything was still. My wife was driving slowly, her eyes fixed on the road. We were all quiet, lost in our own thoughts. I could feel this knot in my stomach, this dread that wouldn't go away. We'd had an experience a few years back near a river where we saw something big and dark moving in the trees, but we never talked about it much. This felt connected, like it was part of the same thing. We continued down the gravel road, maybe a quarter mile from where we'd stopped, when I saw something in the snow on the side of the road. I told my wife to pull over. She didn't want to, but I insisted, my curiosity overriding my fear. I got out, and that's when I saw them. Huge tracks in the snow. I mean, massive. Each print was around 20 inches long and 10 inches wide, with a deep impression, like whatever made it was heavy. The stride between them was way too far apart for a human. I'm 6 feet tall, and I couldn't have matched that without running. The tracks led from the trees across the road and into the woods on the other side. I knelt down, my knees sinking into the snow, and just stared. The shape was human-like, but too big, with toes that seemed splayed out. The snow was disturbed around them, like whatever it was had been moving fast. I felt this chill run through me, starting at the base of my spine and spreading out. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely take a photo with the camera. The light was fading and the tracks looked fresh, like they'd been made recently. I thought about the screaming, the horn, and now this. It all clicked into place in the worst way. We weren't just hearing things. Something was out there, something big and unknown. I got back in the truck and my wife saw my face. She didn't ask, but she knew. We drove the rest of the way home in silence, the kids eventually falling asleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been close to something I still can't explain. To this day, when I think about that scream cutting off with the horn and then seeing those footprints, it sends chills through me. I've never gone back to that spot, and we don't talk about it much as a family. But sometimes, when it's quiet, I'll remember the sound, and I'll wonder what was really out there in the woods that day. Story 5. It was one of those scorching South Carolina afternoons where the air feels thick enough to chew, the kind of humidity that makes your shirt stick to your back 5 minutes after you step outside. The company had rented out this big pavilion at a state park for the annual summer barbecue. You know the deal. Cheap burgers, lukewarm soda, the boss making a slightly awkward speech about teamwork while everyone just wanted to get to the potato salad. My 2 kids, my son who was 7 and my daughter who was 5, were buzzing with that sugar and freedom energy, racing around with a few other employees' kids on the wide, sun-bleached field that stretched out behind the picnic area. The field was huge, maybe the size of 3 football fields put together, and it ended at a thick, dark line of woods. That's where the tree line started, a solid wall of pine and oak that just swallowed the light. I remember thinking it looked cool and inviting from a distance, a relief from the sun. I was standing near the grill, trying to have a conversation with Brenda from accounting about her new puppy, but my attention was split. I always keep one eye on the kids, you know how it is. They were playing some kind of tag, their little shouts and laughs carrying on the heavy air. Then I saw them stop. Not like they were tired, but like they'd hit an invisible wall. They were both staring, frozen, toward the far end of the field. A second later, they were running full tilt toward me, not the happy, playful run from before. This was pure, undiluted panic. My son's face was white as a sheet, and my little girl was crying, these huge, silent tears already streaking through the dirt on her cheeks. They crashed into my legs, nearly knocking me over, both talking at once, their voices high and tight with fear. "Daddy, there's a man!" my son gasped, pointing a trembling finger back toward the woods. "A big, big man!" my daughter sobbed, burying her face in my shorts. My first thought was obviously that some random guy had wandered out of the woods, maybe a hiker or some local kid messing around, but the sheer terror on their faces, it was something else. This wasn't the scared of a stranger look. This was a deep primal fear, the kind you see in animals right before a storm. Okay, shh, it's okay, I said, kneeling down, my heart starting to thump a little harder. "What did you see? Show me." My son, still pointing, his hand shaking, managed to get the words out. Over there, by the trees, it was walking. I stood up, squinting. The sun was behind me, casting long shadows from the woods. At the very far end of the field, maybe 300 yards away, where the tall weeds and scrub brush started to mix with the first trees, I saw it. It was a figure tall. So damn tall. That was the first thing that hit me. It was moving, walking parallel to the tree line, and its height was just wrong. It wasn't basketball player tall. This was something else. It had a sort of loping, effortless stride, and it was dark, a solid, deep, brownish-grey color that stood out against the bright green of the summer foliage. I couldn't make out any details from that distance. No face, no clothes, nothing. But the proportions were off. The arms were too long, and they swung in a way that didn't look human. It wasn't the relaxed swing of a person out for a walk. It was more purposeful, heavier. The whole thing just screamed wrongness into my brain. It moved through the chest-high weeds, and I remember seeing the tops of the weeds swaying, not parting gently like a person would make them, but sort of shuddering as it passed, like it was just plowing through them. "Is that him?" my son whispered, his voice tiny. I didn't answer. I just stood there, frozen, one hand on each of my kids' shoulders, feeling them tremble. My mind was racing, trying to categorize it. A bear? No. The posture was all wrong. Bears don't walk upright like that for more than a few steps. A person in a big coat, in this heat, it was 95 degrees. No one would be wearing a heavy, dark coat. Then it stopped. It just halted its loping walk and turned its upper body toward us. I still couldn't see a face, just a dark, featureless shape. But I knew, I absolutely knew, it was looking right at us. Across all that distance, I felt its attention like a physical weight, a cold dread, completely separate from the swampy heat, washed down my spine and settled in my stomach. My mouth went dry. It stood there for what felt like a full minute, just staring. The background noise of the barbecue, the chatter, the clinking of bottles, someone laughing, it all just faded into a dull buzz. My whole world had shrunk down to that field, my terrified kids and that thing standing at the edge of the woods. Then it moved again. It didn't go back the way it came. It turned, and in 2, maybe 3 of those long, powerful strides, it crossed from the weeds into the tree line and was gone. It didn't push branches aside. It just seemed to be absorbed by the shadows under the trees. 1 second it was there, a solid, impossible shape against the green, and the next, there was nothing but the undisturbed forest. We stood there, the 3 of us, for a long time. I don't know how long. I was straining my eyes, trying to see any movement, any sign of it in the deep shadows between the trees. Nothing. The woods were perfectly still. It was as if the forest had just opened up and swallowed it whole. "Where'd he go, Daddy?" my daughter asked, her voice shaky. "I don't know, baby. I don't know." My rational mind was fighting a losing battle. It was just a trick of the light, a shadow, a deer standing on its hind legs. But I'd seen deer my whole life. I'd seen shadows. This was neither. The kids had seen it first, and they'd seen it clearly enough to be scared out of their minds. They didn't have my adult brain trying to explain things away. They just saw what was there. I finally managed to get my legs to work and led the kids back to the picnic tables, away from the edge of the field. I sat them down and got them some lemonade, my hands not quite steady. I kept glancing back at the tree line. Nothing. Just the same quiet, menacing wall of green. For the rest of the afternoon, the kids were glued to my side. They didn't want to play anymore. Every so often, one of them would bring it up. "It was so big, Daddy. Its arms were really long. Why was it out there all alone?" I didn't have any answers. I just listened, my own unease growing with every whispered comment. I didn't tell anyone else. What was I supposed to say? "Hey, Jim, great burger, by the way. I think my kids and I just saw Bigfoot." No. They'd have thought I was insane, or that we'd all gotten too much sun. so I just kept it to myself, nodding along with conversations I wasn't really hearing, my mind always back on that field. As the sun started to go down, casting long, deep purple shadows across the grass, the party began to wind down. People were packing up their coolers and folding their chairs. The feeling of dread that had been sitting in my gut all afternoon started to tighten. It was the thought of having to walk to the car, which was parked in a lot that bordered those same woods just further down. When it was finally our turn to leave, I held each of my kids' hands tightly. We walked across the pavilion, the gravel crunching under our feet, and onto the path that led to the parking lot. The path was lined with solar-powered lamps that were just starting to glow a weak, orangey light. It didn't do much to push back the deepening gloom under the trees. We were about halfway to the car when my son stopped dead, his small hand crushing mine. He was staring into the woods, his eyes wide. "Daddy," he whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear him. I followed his gaze. The woods were dark now, a mass of black shapes and deeper shadows. At first, I saw nothing. Then my eyes adjusted. Maybe 40, 50 feet into the trees, standing perfectly still behind a thick pine trunk, was a shape, a tall, dark shape. It was mostly hidden by the tree, but I could see one long, heavily built arm resting against the bark, and a sliver of its shoulder and side. It was just standing there, watching us. My blood ran cold. It was closer, so much closer than before. It had followed the tree line. It had been waiting. I didn't scream. I didn't run. Every survival instinct in my body was screaming at me to get the hell out of there, but a deeper, more primal instinct told me that if I ran, if I showed fear, it might trigger something. I stood my ground, pulling my kids slowly behind me, never taking my eyes off that patch of darkness. We stood in a silent standoff for what felt like an eternity, there on the dimly lit path. I could hear the last of the partygoers laughing and calling goodbye to each other in the distance, a world away. I could feel the rough texture of my son's hand in mine, the rapid, bird-like pulse in my daughter's wrist. I could smell the damp, earthy scent of the woods and the faint, greasy smoke from the dying grill. And I could see it, motionless, a part of the forest and yet completely separate from it. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could feel them on me. It wasn't a curious look. It wasn't a friendly look. It was just an observation, a cold, calculating assessment. Then, without a sound, it stepped back. It didn't turn around. It just melted backward into the impenetrable darkness between the trees and was gone. One moment, it was there, a solid breathing presence, and the next, there was only the empty forest. I didn't wait. I scooped my daughter up, grabbed my son's hand, and half walked, half ran to the car. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the door. I got the kids buckled in, slammed the doors, and got the hell out of that parking lot. The kids were quiet on the drive home, exhausted from the fear and the long day. They fell asleep in the back seat. I drove white-knuckled, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a tall, dark figure loping along the road behind us. We never saw it again. We never went back to that park. The kids talked about the big man in the woods for a few weeks, and then, as kids do, they moved on to other things. But I never did. That feeling, the cold, gut-level certainty of what we saw, has never left me. I've lived in this state my whole life, and I've heard the stories, the local legends about things that live deep in the swamps and the untouched forests. I never put much stock in them. I was a skeptic. I'm not a skeptic anymore. I saw something that day that doesn't fit into any box I have. I saw something that walked like a man, but wasn't a man. Something that moved through the world with a quiet, powerful grace that was utterly alien. And the worst part, the thing that still keeps me up some nights, isn't just what I saw. It's the fact that it saw us too. It saw me, and it saw my children. And for a few long minutes, in the growing dark of a South Carolina evening, it decided to just stand there and watch. I'll never know why. I'll never know what it wanted, and I'll never ever forget the sheer, silent intelligence in that presence, the feeling that we weren't just looking at an animal. We were being studied by something that knew exactly what we were. Story 6. It was one of those Sundays that just felt off from the moment I woke up. I'd spent the weekend crashing at a buddy's place in Marinette, Wisconsin. Nothing crazy, just a couple of guys hanging out, watching the game, the usual. But by Sunday afternoon, a weird restlessness had settled in my gut. I just wanted to be home, in my own apartment, in my own bed. I said my goodbyes a little earlier than planned, and I hit the road. The drive started out normal. Boring even, just me, my beat-up Ford Focus, and a whole lot of trees. The sky was starting to get that soft, hazy look it gets in the hour before sunset, where everything is bathed in this golden grey light. I had the window cracked open a couple of inches, letting in the cool, damp air. It smelled like pine and wet earth, the way it always does up there. I was just cruising, my mind drifting to work the next day, what I needed to pick up from the grocery store, just the mundane junk you think about on a long drive. I remember fiddling with the radio. The station from Marinette was fading in and out, dissolving into static, and I was trying to find something else, my eyes flicking down for a second to press the seek button. It couldn't have been more than 2, maybe 3 seconds. But when I looked back up at the road, my entire reality just shifted. Something was crossing the road about 60 feet ahead of me. It wasn't sauntering, it wasn't ambling, it was moving with a purpose, a powerful ground-eating stride that covered the 2-lane blacktop in just a few steps. My brain, in that first fractured second, tried to file it under bare. But it was all wrong. It was upright, not hunched over on all fours, but walking on 2 legs, its torso massive and straight. The shoulders were impossibly wide, like a linebacker's pads, but this was all muscle and fur, thick, shaggy fur, a mix of a deep, oily black and patches of a rusty brown. It was just so damn big. I've seen big black bears up close, but this was a different category of large. It had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall, easy. Its arms were long, swinging with its gait, and the legs were powerful like tree trunks. I didn't see its face clearly. It was turned slightly away from me, and the whole thing happened so fast. But I got an impression of a conical, almost pointed head, and a sheer mass that seemed to absorb the fading light. The way it moved, it wasn't clumsy. It was fluid and incredibly strong, like it owned the ground it was walking on. It vanished into the tree line on the other side of the road in what felt like a single fluid motion. From the time I looked up to the time it disappeared, the whole encounter lasted maybe 4 heartbeats. My foot had already slammed onto the brake, not a panicked jerk, but a hard, instinctive press. The car shuddered as it slowed down to about 35 miles per hour. My heart wasn't just racing, it was a frantic, hammering drum against my ribs, so loud I could feel it in my ears. My hands were clamped on the wheel, my knuckles white. I was staring at the spot where it had disappeared, my eyes scanning the dark wall of trees, trying to pick out any movement, any shape. Nothing. It was just gone. The woods were silent and still, as if they had just swallowed something whole. And then the smell hit me. It came in through the open window slit, a wave of pure physical foulness. It's hard to describe a smell, but this one is burned into my memory. It was like a skunk, but 100 times stronger, mixed with the metallic tang of old blood, and something else, something deeply organic and rotten, like a pile of wet, moldy fur left in the sun. It was so pungent, it felt like it coated the inside of my nose and the back of my throat. It was a smell that had weight to it, a presence. It was utterly repulsive. A jolt of pure, undiluted terror went through me. It was the combination of the 2 things, the impossible sight and this impossible smell, that did it. My skin prickled all over, and the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up. It was a biological reaction. something deep and primal screaming at me that I was in danger. My left hand fumbled for the window switch, my eyes still glued to the trees, and I rolled the window up so fast the motor whined. The thunk of the window ceiling shut was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. My right hand shot over and hit the door lock button. Thunk, thunk. All the doors locked. The sound was so final, so necessary. I was in a metal box now, a little moving cage, and I needed to get away. I stomped on the gas pedal. The engine, which was never that powerful, roared in protest, and the car surged forward. I was hunched over the steering wheel, my body tense, my eyes flicking from the road ahead to the rearview mirror, to the side mirrors, expecting to see that massive dark form bursting out of the woods after me. For the next 10 minutes I drove like a maniac. My speed was way over the limit. My breathing was shallow and quick. Every shadow between the trees looked like it was moving. Every stump, every oddly shaped branch was a potential threat. My mind was a frantic racing mess. What the hell was that? What the hell was that? It kept looping, a desperate, unanswered scream inside my head. The rational part of my brain, the part that pays taxes and worries about getting to work on time, tried to wrestle back control. It was a bear. You saw a bear standing on its hind legs, that's all. It happens. But I kept replaying the image in my mind, the sheer height of it, the width of the shoulders, the way it walked. That wasn't a bear's awkward bow-legged shuffle on 2 feet. Its gait was smooth, purposeful, almost human in its rhythm, but with a raw animal power that was anything but human. A bear doesn't move like that. A bear doesn't have those proportions. Okay, then, a person, some guy in a big fur coat messing around. But who? And why? We were in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town. The road was deserted, and the size, no person is that big, not even the tallest, bulkiest guy on earth. The mass was all wrong. It was too thick, too solid. And the smell. God, the smell. No person, no matter how long they'd been out in the woods, smells like that. That smell was from another world. It was a smell that belonged to something that shouldn't exist. I kept driving, my hand still shaking on the wheel. The initial gut-churning terror had subsided a little, replaced by a deep, cold dread that had settled in the pit of my stomach. I felt hyper-alert. Every sound my car made, the hum of the tires, the whistle of the wind, seemed amplified. I couldn't bring myself to turn the radio back on. The silence felt safer, even though it was a silence I was now afraid of. I started talking to myself out loud, just a low, nervous mutter. It was a deer, a big buck standing up on its hind legs. Yeah, that's it. They do that sometimes to reach leaves. But even as I said it, I knew it was a pathetic lie. Deer are slender, graceful. This thing was a tank. It was built for power, not for grazing. And it was covered in thick, shaggy fur, not a deer's sleek coat. The image was seared into my brain, and it refused to be rationalized away. The smell, thankfully, had faded once I got the window up and put some distance between me and that spot. But for a while, I could have sworn I could still catch a faint, lingering hint of it in the car, a ghost of that foulness clinging to my clothes or my hair. I kept sniffing the air, paranoid, my stomach turning each time. As I drove further south, the woods began to thin out, giving way to more fields and the occasional farmhouse. The sight of a porch light in the distance should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It just felt like I was leaving the scene of a crime, carrying the secret with me. The normal world was still out there, people eating dinner, watching TV, completely unaware that something so vast and unknown was moving through the shadows just a few dozen miles away. My mind kept circling back to the details, the things that made it feel so real, so specific. The way the fur on its back seemed to ripple with the muscle underneath as it moved. The fact that it never once looked in my direction. It just crossed the road, intent on its own destination, completely indifferent to me and my car. That indifference was somehow more terrifying than if it had charged. It meant I was insignificant. It meant that thing was going about its business in a world that ran parallel to my own, a world I was never supposed to catch a glimpse of. I tried to remember if I'd heard any sound. There was no heavy footfall, no crunch of gravel, no grunt. It had been utterly silent, a phantom in the twilight. The only evidence was what I saw and what I smelled. Two senses, both screaming the same terrifying message. The rest of the drive was a blur of tense vigilance. I didn't stop for gas or coffee, even though I needed both. I just wanted to be home, behind a locked door. Every time my headlights swept across a roadside ditch or a clump of bushes, my heart would do a little stutter step. I was looking for it, expecting to see those wide shoulders, that powerful silhouette, waiting for me. When I finally pulled into my apartment parking lot, I sat in the car for a long time, the engine off, just listening to the tick of the cooling metal. I scanned the perimeter of the lot, the dark spaces between buildings. It felt stupid, paranoid. I was in the suburbs now, for God's sake, but the fear wasn't logical. It was a physical thing, a residue left behind by what I'd witnessed. I finally got out, my legs feeling weak, and practically ran to my front door, fumbling with my keys. I got inside, locked the deadbolt, and leaned against the door, breathing heavily. The familiar surroundings of my apartment, the couch, the TV, the stack of mail on the table, felt alien, like I was looking at a diorama of a normal life I didn't belong to anymore. I poured myself a drink, my hands still trembling so badly I almost spilled it. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the building, every car passing on the street outside jolted me awake. I'd lie there in the dark, and all I could see was that figure striding across the road, and all I could smell in my memory was that god-awful stench. That was 3 years ago. I've never gone back up to Marinette. I make excuses when my friend invites me. I've read every story I can find online, every account from people who say they've seen something similar. I know what they call it. I never believed in any of that before. I was a skeptic. I thought it was all campfire stories and blurry photos. I'm not a skeptic anymore. I still drive that same model Ford Focus. Sometimes when I'm on a long, lonely road at dusk, I get a tightness in my chest. I keep my windows up, and if I have to look down to adjust the radio, it's just for a split second, and my eyes snap back to the road so fast it hurts. Because I know what's out there. I saw it. And I know that for a few heartbeats on a quiet Sunday evening, it saw me too. And it just didn't care. It just kept walking, leaving me with a memory and a phantom smell that I can still sometimes catch on the wind. A horror I can never explain away. A truth that is far, far stranger and more terrifying than any fiction. Story 7. The previous owner was an older guy, a little odd but nice enough. On closing day, he'd pulled me aside while the realtors were shuffling papers. He had this serious look on his face. He told me, "Look, the place is great, but there's one thing you got to do. Every week, without fail, you leave an offering. Uncooked hot dogs. Just leave them on the edge of the tree line out back." He pointed towards the dense woods that separated our yard from the golf course. I laughed. I thought he was messing with me, but he wasn't smiling. He said, "It's for the guardians, the big ones. They look after this land. You keep them happy, and they'll keep you happy. Forget, and, well, you'll know." He clapped me on the shoulder, and that was that. I told Billy about it later, and we both had a good chuckle. Sasquatch guardians. We figured it was some local inside joke, a quirky tradition we didn't get yet. We tossed the advice in the mental trash and forgot about it. We were too busy being happy. For the first couple of weeks, everything was perfect. Then the weird stuff started. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember because it was garbage day. I went out back to wheel the bin to the curb and saw that the gate was open. Not just unlatched, but swung wide open. It's a heavy wooden gate, and it latches with a solid metal hook. I know I'd closed it the night before. I always do. I have this whole routine. I just stood there for a second, staring at it. A little prickle went up my neck. I walked over, closed it, and made sure the hook was secure. I wrote it off. Maybe the wind caught it, but there hadn't been any wind. Maybe I'd just forgotten. Yeah, that was probably it. I was busy, distracted. I forgot. A few days later, it happened again, and then again the next week. Every time it was the same gate, swung wide open. I started getting paranoid. I'd check the latch before bed, physically jiggle it to make sure it was set. I'd look out the window before I went upstairs. Closed, then in the morning, open. It was making me crazy. I started thinking someone was messing with us, some kid from the community maybe. It felt like a violation, this little persistent intrusion into our new perfect life. Then it escalated. I went out to fire up the grill for some burgers one Saturday afternoon. It's a nice big Weber kettle grill. As I went to lift the lid, it felt wrong. It was crooked. I looked closer and my blood ran cold. The heavy domed lid was bent. Not just a little dent. The metal hinge on one side was twisted and stretched, like something incredibly strong had just grabbed the edge and yanked it upwards. The lid was hanging on by a thread of metal. You'd need a car jack or something to put that kind of force on cast iron. It wasn't vandalism with a tool. It was vandalism with pure, raw strength. My hands were shaking. This wasn't a kid. This was something else. I felt a cold knot of fear form in my stomach. I was angry, sure, but underneath that was a deep, primitive fear. Something had been in my yard, something powerful, and I had no idea what. I brought Billy out to see it. Her face went pale. "What could have done that?" she whispered. We both just stared at the mangled metal. We called the community security, but they were useless. They drove by, took a report, and said they'd keep an eye out. We felt completely alone. The worst was the weed incident. I woke up one morning, pulled back the curtains in the living room, and my heart just stopped. Our entire brick patio was covered in huge, torn-up weeds. They weren't just tossed, they were thrown. Clumps of dirt and roots were scattered everywhere. These weren't little dandelions. They were massive, stalky things with thick, hairy roots, like small trees that had been ripped right out of the ground, the force required to do that. It was unimaginable. The patio looked like a bomb had gone off in a garden. That was the moment the fear completely took over. The confusion was gone, replaced by a solid, icy dread. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. It felt personal. I was enraged, pacing the house, my hands clenched into fists, but the rage was just a thin shell over a bottomless pit of fear. I felt violated on a level I didn't even know existed. My safe place, our sanctuary, was being invaded by something I couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't stop. It was Billy, her voice quiet and shaky, who said, "The hot dogs." It took me a second to even remember what she was talking about. Then it hit me. The previous owner, his serious face, the guardians, the uncooked hot dogs. It sounded so stupid, so ridiculous standing there in our violated home. But what else did we have? We were out of ideas. Desperate people do desperate things. We decided to talk to a neighbor, the guy next door, an older fellow who'd lived here for 20 years. We went over, feeling like complete idiots, and I haltingly explained what had been happening. The gate, the grill, the weeds. I didn't mention the Sasquatch part. I just said we were being harassed. He listened, nodding slowly. Then he started to laugh. Not a mean laugh, but a deep, knowing chuckle. "You're the new folks in the Miller's old place, right?" he said. "Didn't he tell you about the wieners?" My jaw practically hit the floor. Billy and I just looked at each other. It was real. This wasn't just the previous owner being eccentric. It was a whole thing. He told us, I said, my voice weak. We didn't really believe him. The neighbor's smile faded. "You should have. They're real particular about their offerings. You skip a week, they let you know they're unhappy. Skip a few and they get creative." He gestured back towards our house. "Consider that a creative reminder." We drove to the grocery store in a daze. We bought 3 family-sized packs of the cheapest, grossest-looking hot dogs we could find. That evening, as the sun was going down, I carried them out to the tree line. The woods felt different now. They weren't just pretty trees anymore. They were a wall, hiding something. I felt like I was being watched from 100 different places. The hair on my arms was standing up. I hurriedly ripped open the packages and dumped the pale, slimy hot dogs onto the ground in a big pile. It felt absurd, like I was in a dream. I backed away quickly, not turning my back until I was safely inside with the door locked. We didn't sleep much that night. Every little noise made us jump. We kept expecting another creative reminder. But nothing happened. The next day, nothing. The day after, the gate was still closed. A week went by. Complete peace. It was unnerving. The silence felt heavier than before, like it was a gift we'd been given. We were too scared to be relieved. We were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then, exactly 1 week after we left the hot dogs, Billy called me out to the patio. Her voice was strange. "Come look at this." I went out, my heart thumping. She was standing by the grill, pointing. There, placed right in the center of the grill's cooking grate, was a rock. Not just any rock. It was a river rock, smooth and oval, about the size of my palm. It was a deep, shiny black, streaked with veins of white like marble. It was wet, like it had just been pulled from the lake. It was clean, and it had been placed there with deliberate care, right in the middle. We both just stared at it. That rock sitting there on the bent grill was the most terrifying and profound thing I had ever seen. It wasn't a threat. It was a message, a thank you. The knot of fear in my stomach didn't disappear, but it changed. It mixed with a sense of awe and a bizarre, creeping sense of connection. We had apologized and we had been forgiven. The vandalism had been a lesson. This was the graduation certificate. That was the turning point. We never forgot again. Every Sunday night, like clockwork, we buy the hot dogs. I walk out to the same spot at the tree line. The woods don't feel threatening anymore, but they command respect. I lay out the offering, and I always say a quiet thank you under my breath. It's our ritual now. It's just part of living here, and we see them sometimes. Not clearly, never up close. We'll be sitting on the patio at dusk and see a massive dark shape moving between the trees down by the lake's edge. It's always just a shadow, a suggestion of immense height and breadth, gone the second you try to focus on it. Once I saw one standing at the far shore, just looking across the water towards our house. It was tall, so much taller than a man, and powerfully built. It stood there for a full minute before it simply turned and melted back into the forest without a sound. It didn't feel menacing. It felt observant, like a watchman on his rounds. We have a harmonious relationship now. Our property is never disturbed. The gate stays shut. It's a peace that was bought with cheap processed meat and a healthy dose of primal fear. We don't talk about it with people who don't live here. They wouldn't get it. You have to live it to understand. This is our normal now. We live in a beautiful house on a lake, and we have an understanding with the guardians of the land. And sometimes, on a quiet evening, we'll look out at the dark tree line, see a shadow move, and know without a doubt that we are not alone. And for the first time since we moved in, that thought doesn't scare me. It just is. Story 8. Okay, so I've never really shared this with anyone before, but I think it's time I got it out there. This happened to me on September 14th, 1999, and I still get chills just thinking about it. I was up near Hope, British Columbia, off the Hope-Princeton Highway, gathering firewood for a camping trip I was on by myself. It was one of those solo things I did back then to clear my head, you know. Just me, my truck, and the woods. That morning, it was around 8:45, and the sun was already up but not too high, casting long shadows through the trees. The air had that crisp, early autumn bite to it. and I remember pulling my jacket tighter as I got out of the truck. I'd parked in a little pull-off spot that wasn't really a proper parking area, just a widened bit of gravel where the highway curved. I'd been there before a couple times because the woods were thick with fallen branches and dry wood, perfect for a fire. The ground sloped down into this steep gully right away, almost like a small ravine, with loose rocks and dirt that made you watch your step. I had a couple of burlap sacks with me for carrying the wood, and I started making my way down, my boots crunching on the dry leaves and twigs. The smell was all pine and damp earth, mixed with that cool, clean air you only get out in the middle of nowhere. As I moved deeper into the gully, I could hear the distant hum of the highway fading behind me, replaced by the sounds of birds chirping and the occasional rustle in the underbrush. I wasn't too worried about animals because I'd seen signs warning about grizzlies in the area, but I figured if I kept quiet and stayed alert, I'd be fine. I've always been pretty cautious in the woods, grew up around here, so I know how to move without making a racket. I was focusing on picking up decent-sized branches, stuff that would burn well, and my mind was kind of wandering, thinking about nothing in particular, just enjoying the solitude. Then, as I was bending down to grab a piece of wood, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I straightened up slowly, and that's when I saw it. At the bottom of the gully, maybe 50 feet away from me, there was this large, dark, reddish-brown animal standing upright. My first thought was, oh shit, it's a bear, but something felt off right away. It had its back to me, and it was scratching at these bushes with what looked like its hands or paws. I froze for a second, just watching. The fur was shaggy, really thick and matted, and I could see lighter-colored undersides on its limbs, almost like a creamy tan on the parts that weren't covered in dirt or shadows. The way it moved was deliberate, not like a bear rooting around for food. It was more purposeful, like it was searching for something. My heart started thumping in my chest, and I remember feeling this cold sweat break out on my forehead. I've seen bears before, and they're usually hunched over or on all fours, but this thing was standing fully upright like a person. Its shoulders were broad, and it was massive, way bigger than any black bear I'd ever encountered. I figured it might be a grizzly, given the warnings, so I decided to back away slowly. I didn't want to startle it. I took a step back, then another, keeping my eyes locked on it. The ground was uneven, and I had to be careful not to trip on any roots or rocks. My breathing was shallow, and I could feel the adrenaline starting to kick in, making my hands tremble a little. I must have made some noise, because all of a sudden it stopped scratching and went still. Then it turned its head, like it had sensed me. I couldn't see its face because there were branches in the way, but I got this gut-wrenching feeling that it was looking right at me. The air felt heavier, like the whole forest had gone quiet. Even the birds stopped chirping. I held my breath, not moving a muscle. For a few seconds, nothing happened, and I thought maybe it would just ignore me and go back to whatever it was doing. But then it started to turn its whole body toward me, and that's when I really panicked. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and started hurrying back up the slope, my heart racing so fast I could feel it in my throat. The gully was steep and my legs felt weak, like they might give out any second. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see it charging after me, but what I saw instead made my blood run cold. It wasn't following me on all fours like a bear would. It was climbing the slope upright on two legs, using its forearms to pull itself up over the rough terrain. The way it moved was so fluid and humanoid. It had this grace to it that was utterly terrifying. Its arms were long and powerful, and it barely seemed to struggle with the incline, even though it was almost vertical in spots. I could see its head now, and it looked small compared to its massive build, almost out of proportion. The fur on its body was dark and matted, but I could make out the shape of its shoulders and back muscles, working as it climbed. I scrambled faster, my boots slipping on the loose dirt, and I had to grab onto saplings and rocks to keep from falling. My lungs were burning, and I could taste the dust in my mouth. Every time I looked back, it was gaining ground, but it wasn't making a sound. No grunts, no snapping branches, just this eerie silence. That was one of the things that stuck with me, how quiet it was. In the woods, everything makes noise, but this thing moved like a ghost. I finally reached the top of the gully and stumbled toward my truck, fumbling for the keys in my pocket. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the door open. I threw myself inside and locked the doors, my chest heaving as I tried to catch my breath. Through the windshield, I saw it reach the top of the slope and pause for a moment. It stood there fully upright, and I got a clearer look at it. It was easily 7 or 8 feet tall, with broad shoulders and that reddish-brown fur that seemed almost black in the shadows. Its head was indeed small, with what might have been a flat face, but I couldn't make out any features from that distance. Then, without a sound, it turned and disappeared into the lodgepole pines, blending into the trees like it had never been there. I sat there for what felt like forever, just staring at the spot where it had vanished, my heart still pounding. The forest sounds slowly returned. Birds started chirping again, and I could hear the wind rustling the leaves. But I felt frozen, like I'd just witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. I didn't stick around. I started the truck and peeled out of there, my tires kicking up gravel as I sped back onto the highway. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I kept going over it in my head, the way it stood, the way it climbed, the silence. It wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that. They're powerful, but they're not that graceful on 2 legs, and the size was all wrong. I've spent enough time in the woods to know what a grizzly looks like, and this was different. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that what I'd seen fit the descriptions of a Sasquatch, something I'd always dismissed as folklore. But there was no dismissing it now. The terror of that moment, realizing its humanoid movement and strength, hit me all over again. I felt this mix of awe and fear, like I'd come face to face with something ancient and unknown. I drove for a while before I pulled over at a rest stop to calm down. My hands were still trembling, and I had to sit there for a bit just to stop shaking. I thought about reporting it, but who would believe me? I didn't have any proof, no photos or anything, just this vivid memory that stuck with me for over 2 decades. For the rest of that day, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see it again, but I never did. I ended up cutting my camping trip short and heading home early. The whole drive back, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been in the presence of something beyond understanding. Even now, all these years later, I sometimes wake up in a cold sweat, remembering the way it moved up that slope with such ease, like it belonged there in a way I never could. I've never gone back to that spot, and I doubt I ever will. What happened that day left me with a lasting mystery, one I can't explain no matter how hard I try. It was the closest I've ever come to something like that, and it filled me with a deep, primal fear that's never really gone away. I still wonder what it was doing there, why it was scratching at those bushes, and what would have happened if I'd stayed longer. But I guess I'll never know. All I have is the memory, and the chilling certainty that I wasn't alone in those woods. Story 9. Okay, so this happened about 2 years ago, and I still get chills thinking about it. I've never really talked about it online before, but I've been reading some stories on here lately, and it's made me want to get this off my chest. Maybe someone else has been through something similar. I'll try to keep it as real as I can, because honestly, it's one of those things that sounds made up, but I swear on my life it's true. It was a Saturday in late October, and I was on a fraternity outing with a few of my buddies. We'd driven out to this pretty remote campsite near a river in upstate New York, not super far from our college, but far enough that you felt totally cut off from everything. The area was dense with woods, and the river flowed fast and loud, cutting through this valley with a steep hill looming over one side. We'd set up camp the night before, just a basic tent setup with a fire pit, and we were planning to spend the weekend fishing, hiking, and just messing around. There were 4 of us total, all guys from the frat. But I'm not going to use names because it feels weird to drag them into it, and besides, we all kind of agreed to keep this quiet afterward. That morning, we woke up to a crisp, cool day. The air had that autumn bite to it, and the sun was still low, casting long shadows through the trees. We'd burned through most of our firewood the night before, so we decided to gather more before it got too late. The plan was to split up a bit to cover more ground, but we stayed within earshot, just in case. I was with two other guys, and we headed down toward the riverbank, where there was a lot of deadfall and driftwood. The ground was soft and muddy near the water, and the hill rose up sharply on our left, covered in thick pines and oaks. It was quiet except for the river rushing by and the occasional bird call, the kind of peacefulness that makes you forget about exams and deadlines. We'd been at it for maybe 20 minutes, just picking up sticks and smaller logs, when I started to notice something off. At first I thought it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon rustling around in the underbrush. But the sounds were different. They were heavier, like something big was moving through the trees up on the hill. I remember stopping and listening, my hands full of a bunch of dry branches. One of my buddies, let's call him Mike for simplicity, though that's not his real name, he glanced over at me and raised an eyebrow. "You hear that?" he whispered. I nodded, and we both stood still for a second. The rustling got louder, and then we heard branches snapping, not little twigs, but thick ones, like something was pushing through the brush with force. It was coming from higher up the hill, maybe 50 yards away, but it was hard to tell with all the trees blocking the view. My heart started to beat a little faster. I'm not usually a jumpy person. I've been camping since I was a kid, but this felt different. It wasn't the casual movement of a deer. It was more deliberate, almost like whatever it was knew we were there. We all kind of froze, just listening. The sound kept coming, getting closer, and now it was accompanied by this low, guttural noise. Not a growl exactly, but something deep and throaty, like a heavy breath being let out. I could feel the hair on my arms standing up. Mike whispered again, "What the hell is that?" And I just shook my head. We were all staring up the hill, trying to see through the trees, but it was too dense. The sun was hitting the canopy, creating these weird patches of light and shadow, and it made it even harder to make anything out. Then, the rustling stopped for a moment, and everything went quiet, too quiet. The river seemed louder suddenly, like it was drowning out everything else. I remember thinking maybe it was just a bear. We'd seen signs of them in the area, and it made sense. But bears don't usually move like that, all stealthy and then stopping dead. I could feel this knot forming in my stomach, and my hands were getting sweaty. I dropped the wood I was holding, and it made a dull thud on the ground, which seemed way too loud in the silence. That's when Mike, who's always been the impulsive one, picked up a decent-sized rock from the riverbank. It was about the size of his fist, smooth and wet from the water. He didn't say anything, just hefted it and threw it up toward where the sounds had been coming from. It wasn't an aggressive throw, more like a test to see if he could scare whatever it was away. The rock arced through the air and landed with a crash in the bushes. For a second, nothing happened. Then all hell broke loose. The rustling started again, but this time it was frantic, and the branches started snapping like crazy. And then we heard it, this heavy, pounding footsteps coming straight toward us. Fast, really fast. It wasn't the lumbering run of a bear. It was more like a sprint, something bipedal. My brain couldn't process it at first. I just saw movement through the trees, this large, dark shape barreling down the hill. It was too big to be a person, but it was running on two legs, and it was closing the distance in seconds. The terror hit me like a physical blow. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest, and I couldn't breathe. I don't think I've ever been that scared in my life. We all screamed, just instinct, I guess, and turned to run. I didn't even think. My body just took over. We were scrambling back toward camp, which was about 100 yards away, through a slightly clearer path along the river. The ground was uneven, with roots and rocks everywhere, and I almost tripped twice. Behind us, the footsteps kept coming, and now there was this sound, a kind of high-pitched yell, but distorted, like it was coming from something with a huge chest. It wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. It was eerie, like something out of a nightmare, and it echoed off the hill and the river, making it seem like it was everywhere. I glanced back once, and I wish I hadn't. I caught a glimpse of this thing. It was tall, maybe 7 feet or more, and covered in dark, shaggy hair. Its arms were long, swinging as it ran, and its face... I didn't get a good look, but it was just a blur of darkness with no clear features. It was gaining on us, and I could hear its breath, heavy and raspy, mixed with that awful scream. The smell hit me too, a musky, earthy odor like wet dog and decay that made my stomach turn. We were running full tilt, our legs burning, and I could hear my friends panting and shouting. One of them, let's call him Chris, he stumbled and almost went down, but I grabbed his arm and yanked him up. We didn't stop, didn't look back again. The camp was in sight now, the tents and the smoldering fire pit, and I put on one last burst of speed. I don't know how we made it, but we crashed into the campsite, collapsing on the ground, gasping for air. The thing must have stopped at the tree line because the sounds faded away. We lay there for what felt like forever, just trying to catch our breath, our hearts pounding so hard I thought they'd bruise my ribs. The silence returned, but it was different now, tense, like the woods were holding their breath. We slowly got up, peering back toward the river. Nothing, no movement, no sound except the river and our own ragged breathing. We didn't say much at first, just stared at each other, wide-eyed and shaking. One of the guys, the fourth one who'd been back at camp tending the fire, he came over and asked what happened. We tried to explain, but it came out in jumbled sentences. Something big ran at us, I managed to say, my voice trembling. He looked skeptical at first, but then he saw how pale we were, how we were still shaking, and he believed us. We packed up in record time. No discussion, just everyone grabbing gear and throwing it into the cars. We didn't even bother to put out the fire properly, just kicked dirt on it and got the hell out of there. As we were driving away, one of my friends, the one I called Mike earlier, he started talking about something that happened to him a year ago. He said he never told anyone because it sounded crazy, but after what we just went through, he had to share it. He said he was house-sitting for his parents in a rural area, and one night he heard this banging on the side of the house, not like knocking, but heavy, rhythmic thuds, like someone was hitting the wall with a sledgehammer. He looked out the window, but couldn't see anything. It went on for about 10 minutes, then stopped. The next morning he found these huge, muddy footprints around the house, too big to be human. He thought it was a prank at first, but after today, he wondered if it was connected. We drove in silence after that, just processing everything. The whole way back, I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see that thing in the trees. I've never felt so vulnerable, so small. Even now, writing this, my hands are a little shaky. I don't know what it was, a bear, a person in a costume, or something else. But the way it moved, the sound it made, the smell, it didn't feel like anything I've ever encountered. And that scream, God, that scream still echoes in my head sometimes when I'm trying to sleep. We never went back to that campsite. We don't talk about it much, but when we do, it's in hushed tones, like we're afraid of summoning it again. I've done some research since then, read about Bigfoot sightings and other weird stuff, and it fits in a lot of ways. But I'm not claiming it was Bigfoot or anything, just something I can't explain. Something that left me with this deep, lingering fear of the woods, especially near rivers and hills. I used to love camping, but now, if I go, I stick to crowded parks and never go alone. That's it, really. That's what happened that day. I wish I had more answers, but I don't. All I have is the memory and the feeling that whatever it was, it's still out there, watching. Story 10. Okay, so I've never posted anything like this before, but I need to get this out there because it's been eating at me for a while now. I live in Georgia, out in the sticks where the woods are thick and it's quiet most of the time. This happened on a Tuesday morning, one of those cold ones where the air bites at your skin and your breath comes out in little clouds. I remember it was a Tuesday because I had the day off from work, and I was just trying to enjoy the quiet before the day really started. I was outside calling for my dog, Buddy. He's a mutt, part shepherd, part who knows what, and he's got this habit of wandering off into the woods behind our house. We've got a kennel out back. It's about 6 feet tall, made of metal bars, and we usually keep him in there if we're going to be out for a while. But that morning, he'd somehow slipped out again. I wasn't too worried at first. He does this sometimes, and he always comes back after a bit. But it was cold, and I didn't want him getting into trouble, so I went out to call for him. The kennel is set up near the tree line, maybe about 20 feet from the woods. I was standing right next to it, shouting Buddy's name, my voice echoing a little in the stillness. The ground was hard from the cold, and I could feel the chill seeping through my boots. I remember pulling my jacket tighter around me, wishing I'd worn a thicker one. The sky was overcast, that dull grey color that makes everything feel a little heavier. As I was scanning the woods, my eyes caught movement through the bars of the kennel. At first, I thought it was Buddy. Maybe he'd heard me and was coming back, but then I realized it was too big, way too big to be him. I squinted, trying to make it out through the gaps in the bars. That's when I saw it clearly. A large, brown, hairy figure standing just inside the tree line. It was tall, I'd guess around 7 feet, and covered in this long, red-brown hair that looked matted and wild. Its face was lighter, almost a pale tan color, and I could see one of its ears, pointed like a dog's or something, but bigger and more defined. It was just standing there, not moving, and it was looking right at me. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I froze, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I've lived here my whole life, and I've seen bears, deer, even coyotes, but this was nothing like any of them. Bears are bulky and move differently, and this thing was upright, standing on 2 legs like a person, but it wasn't a person. The hair was too thick, the proportions all wrong. I felt this cold dread wash over me, worse than the morning chill. My hands started to shake, and I had to grip the kennel bar to steady myself. I remember thinking, this can't be real. But there it was, staring right back at me. I don't know how long we stood there like that. Maybe only a few seconds, but it felt like forever. Then, without any warning, it moved. It didn't run or walk. It jumped. I heard this heavy thud, like something massive hitting the ground, and then another and another. It sounded like it was landing on its knees and hands, like it was dropping down to all fours, but in a way that was too forceful, too jarring. The noise was loud, a deep, solid impact that made the ground vibrate slightly. I could feel it through my feet, and that's when the fear really kicked in. I didn't think. I just turned and ran. My legs felt weak, like they were made of rubber, but I pushed myself toward the house. I didn't look back. I was too scared to. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud, and the thudding sound seemed to follow me. The back door felt miles away, even though it was only about 30 feet. I stumbled once, my boot catching on a root, but I caught myself and kept going. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I could feel sweat breaking out on my forehead despite the cold. I reached the door and yanked it open, practically falling inside. I slammed it shut and locked it, my hands trembling so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, my whole body shaking. I pressed my ear to the wood, listening, but everything outside was silent again, too silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. It was like the world had gone dead. After a minute, I crept over to the window that looks out onto the backyard. I pulled the curtain back just enough to peer out, my heart still racing. That's when I saw it again, or part of it. It was moving away, deeper into the woods, and I got a clear view of its arm and hand. The arm was thick and muscular, covered in that same red-brown hair, and the hand was huge, with long fingers that curled slightly. It wasn't a paw, it had distinct fingers, almost human-like, but bigger and rougher looking. That sight sealed it for me. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't any animal I knew of. Bears have paws, deer don't have hands like that. This was something else entirely. I stayed by that window for what felt like hours, just watching, but nothing else happened. The woods were still and quiet, and eventually I forced myself to step away. My legs were still wobbly, and I had to sit down on the floor because my knees felt like they'd give out. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head over and over, trying to find some logical explanation, but there wasn't one. The image of that pointed ear and those hands was burned into my mind. I didn't go back outside that day. I called my family later, but when I tried to explain what happened, they brushed it off, said it was probably a bear or my imagination, but I know what I saw. The fear didn't leave me. It settled in like a weight in my chest. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept checking the windows, half expecting to see it again. A few days later, I heard a low grunt growl from the same part of the woods. It was deep and guttural, nothing like any animal sound I've ever heard. Then, my brother came over and found a path with broken tree limbs, snapped in a way that looked like something big had forced its way through. He didn't say much, but I could tell he was spooked too. That was enough for me. Whatever it is, it's still out there, and I don't think I'll ever feel safe in my own backyard again. Story 11. All right, I'm just going to type this out. I've been sitting on it for years, and I guess this is as good a place as any to put it down. My name is Shannon Morgan. This all started when I was a kid, back in the late 70s, early 80s. I can never remember the exact year, just that I was young, maybe 10 or 11. My family had this property in central Pennsylvania, way out in the sticks. It wasn't just a house with a big yard. It was real backcountry, the kind of place where the trees go on forever and you can't see your nearest neighbor, not even their roof. My brother and I, we lived out in those woods. They were our whole world. The day it happened, we were turkey hunting. It was early morning, the kind of cold that gets right into your bones, even through your jacket. The air was sharp and clean, smelling like damp earth and pine. We were crouched behind this old log blind we'd built ourselves, a pile of rotting timber that gave us a view over a small clearing. I remember the feeling of the rough, wet bark against my knees, the way the dew was soaking into my jeans. My brother was next to me, holding his breath, trying to be still. We'd been out there for what felt like hours, just waiting. You know how it is when you're a kid and you're trying to be quiet. Every little sound you make seems like a thunderclap. I remember my stomach grumbling because we'd skipped breakfast to get out there at first light. I had this little box call in my hand, and I gave it a soft cluck, just trying to sound like a hen. Everything was normal. The woods were waking up. I could hear birds starting to chirp, the distant rustle of a squirrel in the leaves, and then it all just stopped. The woods went dead silent. Not a bird, not a bug, nothing. It was like someone had thrown a switch. That was the first thing that felt wrong. My brother and I looked at each other, and I saw the same confusion in his eyes. We didn't say anything. We just knew. The air felt different, thicker, and then we felt it, a presence. It's hard to describe, but it's a feeling you get on the back of your neck, a primal kind of awareness that something is right behind you, watching. It was a heavy feeling, like a weight pressing down on us. We both turned our heads at the same time. Slow, like if we moved too fast it would break something. It was standing there, maybe 20 feet away, just at the edge of the thicker brush. My brain couldn't make sense of it at first. It was massive. I mean, just huge. Over 7 feet tall, easy. It was covered in this long, matted hair, a mix of brown and a weird, almost greenish color that made it blend right into the ferns and the undergrowth. It was like it was made out of the woods themselves. The hair wasn't clean or fluffy. It was clumped and dirty, tangled with leaves and bits of twig. I never saw its face. The hair was so long and matted over its head that its features were just a dark shadow. But I didn't need to see its face. The sheer size of it, the way it was just standing there, completely still, staring right at us. That was enough. My heart just dropped into my stomach. It was a cold, sharp terror, the kind that freezes you for a second. I couldn't breathe. I just stared, my hand still clenched around the stupid turkey call. My brother made this little gasping sound, a tiny choked-off noise, and then it moved. It wasn't a slow movement. It took a step forward, and its whole body shifted with a power that was terrifying. It wasn't clumsy, it was purposeful. And that's when we broke. We didn't say a word. We didn't have to. We just bolted. We scrambled up from behind that log blind and we ran. We ran like our lives depended on it, because in that moment, we truly believed they did. I remember the feeling of my lungs burning, the cold air tearing at my throat. I remember the sound of our boots pounding on the ground, crashing through ferns and snapping small branches, but louder than all of that was the sound behind us. It was chasing us. I could hear it. It was a crashing sound, like something big and heavy moving fast through the brush. I could hear limbs snapping, not little twigs, but thick branches, like it was just plowing through the woods without even trying to go around anything. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I just ran, my brother right beside me, both of us panting and sobbing in pure, undiluted fear. That sound, that relentless crashing, it was right behind us the whole way. It felt like it was right on our heels, like if I stumbled for just a second, it would be on me. That's the feeling that has never left me, the feeling of being prey. We finally burst out of the tree line into the open field near our house. We didn't stop running until we were on the back porch, slamming the screen door shut and fumbling with the lock. We were both crying, covered in sweat and scrapes, trying to catch our breath and tell our parents what happened through hysterical sobs. Of course, they thought we'd just spooked ourselves, seen a bear or something, but we knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand on two legs like that. Bears don't have that kind of shape, and they don't make you feel watched like that. That was it for years. We stopped going deep into the woods after that. The feeling of that day just kind of settled over the property. A bad memory we didn't talk about much. Then in 2008 it started again. I was an adult by then, living back at the old place for a while. It was winter, a real nasty snowstorm. The wind was howling, whipping snow against the windows. I was in the main room of the cabin, reading by the fire, when something hit the side of the house. It wasn't a branch. It was a single massive thump that came from the outside wall. The whole cabin shook. I'm not talking about a little vibration. A picture fell off the wall, and the furniture actually shifted. The lamp on the table next to me wobbled. My heart just seized up. That old childhood fear came rushing back in an instant. I sat there, frozen, listening, but there was nothing else, just the wind. I didn't go outside. No way. A few nights later, I was sick with a bad cold. I was in my bedroom, and I kept coughing and sniffling. After one particularly loud cough, I heard it. From right outside my window, a perfect mimic of my cough. It wasn't an echo, it was a copy. It was slightly deeper, rougher, but it was my cough. I held my breath, my whole body going cold. A minute later, I sniffed, and from outside, I heard the same sniff back at me. I didn't move for the rest of the night. I just pulled the covers over my head and prayed for morning. Things got weirder that summer. It was July, a hot, humid day. We had family and friends over, and we were all out by the pool. It was a happy, noisy day. Kids splashing, people laughing. Then my cousin, who was sitting in a lounge chair, just went quiet. He was staring into the tree line, his face pale. He pointed. "What is that?" he whispered. We all looked. About 50 yards away, at the edge of the woods, there was a figure. It was just standing there, half hidden behind a big oak tree. It was tall and dark, and it was just watching us, not moving. just watching. The whole mood of the day just died. The laughter stopped. Everyone got quiet. We all saw it. We couldn't make out details from that distance, but we all felt it. That same feeling of being watched, of being studied. It stood there for a full minute before it just melted back into the shadows. No sound, no movement. It was just gone. That night, we were all on edge. We'd locked up the house tight. I was trying to sleep when I heard it, knocking. 3 heavy, deliberate knocks on the side of the house. They were loud, like someone hitting the wood with a giant fist. Boom, boom, boom. It wasn't on the door. It was on the wall. A few seconds of silence, and then it came again from a different part of the house. Boom, boom, boom. We all ended up huddled in the central hallway. My dad had his rifle. I had a baseball bat. We just sat there on the floor, listening as the knocks moved around the house. It felt like it was circling us. We were surrounded. The worst part was the feeling that came with it. It felt intelligent. It felt like it was playing with us, letting us know it was there, and that we were trapped inside. We felt watched from every dark window. We stayed like that until the sun came up. In December of that same year, I was taking the trash out to the bin. The ground was frozen solid, covered in a thin layer of crusty snow. It was dead quiet, and then I heard footsteps, heavy, bipedal footsteps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They were walking, not running, somewhere in the woods just beyond the yard light. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear them perfectly on the frozen ground. I stood there, completely still, the bag of trash in my hand, just listening to this thing walk through the woods in the dark. It was so casual. It wasn't hiding. It was just walking. I dropped the trash and ran back inside. The final thing, the thing that confirmed it all for me, happened in 2014. We'd had a fresh snowfall overnight, a good 6 inches of clean white powder. In the morning, I went out to get firewood from the shed, and that's when I saw them tracks. They were huge, I mean, absolutely massive. I'm not a tracker, but I know what a bear track looks like, and these weren't bear tracks. They were like giant human footprints, but wider. They were partly filled with snow, so the details were soft, but the size was undeniable. I felt that old fear clench in my gut. I followed them with my eyes, and my blood ran cold. They came out of the deep woods, crossed the open backfield, and went right up to the edge of the tree line near the house. And here's the thing that still messes with my head. The tracks had a stride of 52 inches. I know because I went back later with a tape measure. 52 inches. That's over 4 feet between steps. And in one place, the path we used to take the four-wheeler on was cleared. It was a narrow, packed-down trail. The tracks went right up to it. And then the next print was on the other side. It had stepped clean over the path without breaking stride. It just stepped over it like it was nothing. I stood there looking at those tracks leading out of the deep, dark woods and right up to my home. And I knew it was the same thing from when I was a kid. It had never left. It had been here all along, all those years. It was the thing that hit the cabin, the thing that mimicked my cough, the watcher by the pool, the thing that knocked on the walls and walked through the frozen woods. And the whole time, through all of it, our dogs, who would bark at a leaf blowing across the yard, never made a sound. They'd just whimper and hide under the porch. Their silence was louder than any noise it ever made. So that's it. That's my story. It's still out there. I don't know what it is. I don't go looking for it. I just know it's in those woods in central Pennsylvania, and it's been there my whole life. And sometimes on a quiet night when the wind is just right, I'll hear something out in the dark, and I'll remember that feeling of being chased, and I know I'll never truly feel safe here again. Story 12. So, I'm just gonna dive right into this because honestly, I haven't really talked about it much since it happened, and every time I think about it, my hands get all shaky. This was back in early October, around Applegate Lake in southern Oregon. My family's got this property out there. It's not huge, maybe 50 acres or so, but it's thick with woods and feels way more isolated than it actually is. My brother and I, we go out there every few weeks to check on things, make sure no one's trespassing or that there's no storm damage. It's usually pretty routine, you know? Just a couple of hours in the morning, then we head back home. But this one day, man, this day stuck with me like a bad dream that just won't fade. It started like any other Saturday. I woke up around 7 in the morning. The sky was still kind of gray and overcast, with that chill in the air that makes you want to stay in bed, but my brother was already banging on my door, saying we needed to get going early because he had plans later. So I dragged myself out, threw on some old jeans and a hoodie, laced up my boots. They're these sturdy hiking boots I've had for years, size 11, and we hopped into his truck. The drive out to the property is about 20 minutes from where we live, mostly on dirt roads that wind through the forest. The leaves were starting to turn, all oranges and reds, and the ground was damp from rain the night before. It smelled like wet pine and earth, which is usually kind of comforting, but that day it just felt heavy. We pulled up to the gate around 8:30, and my brother unlocked it while I stretched my legs. The first thing we noticed was how quiet it was, like unnaturally quiet. No birds chirping, no squirrels rustling in the underbrush. Just this dead silence that made the hair on my arms stand up, but we shrugged it off, thinking maybe it was just the weather. We started walking down the main road that cuts through the property, just checking for fallen branches or signs of people messing around. That's when I saw them. Footprints, not just any footprints, but huge ones, pressed deep into the mud. I stopped dead in my tracks and called my brother over. "Hey, check this out," I said, my voice coming out a little too high. He came over and we both just stared. These things were massive, like twice the size of my boots. I'm not exaggerating. I held my foot up next to one, and it was like comparing a kid's shoe to a giant's. The prints were human-like, with 5 toes, but they were way too big to be from a person. The impressions were deep, like whatever made them was heavy, and they were spaced far apart, like it was taking long strides. My first thought was maybe a bear, but bears don't walk on 2 legs like that, not for long distances, and the toes, they were spread out, almost like fingers. But in a footprint, it gave me this cold knot in my stomach. My brother, he's always the practical one. He knelt down, poked at the mud with a stick. "Could be a trespasser messing with us," he said, but his voice was shaky. Or maybe a big bear standing up. But we both knew bears don't leave prints that look so human. We followed the trail for a bit, and the prints led off the road toward this old lean-to we have near the edge of the property. The lean-to's just a simple wooden structure, mostly for storage, or if we get caught in a storm. As we got closer, the silence got heavier, and I could feel my heart starting to pound. The air felt thick, like it was hard to breathe. When we reached the lean-to, that's when things got really weird. The ground around it was all torn up, like something had been digging or dragging stuff. And there were more of those footprints, dozens of them, circling the lean-to. Some were fresh, others looked a day or 2 old. My brother pointed to the side of the lean-to where we keep some tools, and the door was slightly ajar. Not broken, just open, like something had pushed it. We both froze, listening. That's when I caught a whiff of something foul, a metallic coppery smell mixed with rot. It hit me like a punch to the gut, and I felt bile rise in my throat. "What the hell is that?" my brother whispered, and we slowly moved around the back of the lean-to, and that's when we saw it, the dead doe. It was lying in a patch of ferns, but it wasn't just dead. It was torn to pieces, like literally ripped apart. The guts were spilled out in a heap, blood was everywhere, splattered on the leaves and soaking into the ground. The head was twisted at a weird angle, and one of the legs was just gone. Flies were buzzing around, and the smell was so strong I had to cover my nose with my sleeve. My stomach churned, and I felt dizzy for a second, leaning against a tree to steady myself. My brother was pale, his hands trembling. "This isn't a bear," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Bears don't do this. They kill, but they don't tear things apart like this." He was right. I've seen bear kills before. They're messy, but this was different. This was violent, almost angry. The blood wasn't just pooled. It was sprayed around like whatever did. This was thrashing the body. And those footprints were all over the place, leading right up to the doe and then back into the woods. We stood there for what felt like forever, just staring, our breaths coming in short puffs in the cold air. I could feel the fear creeping up my spine, cold and sharp. My skin was crawling, and every little sound, a twig snapping, the wind rustling leaves, made me jump. That's when we heard it, a low, guttural sound from deep in the woods. Not a growl exactly, but something deeper, more resonant. It was far off, but it echoed through the trees, and it made the hairs on my neck stand straight up. My brother grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "We need to get out of here," he said, and I didn't argue. We started backing away, keeping our eyes on the trees, but it was like the woods were watching us. I could feel eyes on me, this primal sense of being hunted. My heart was hammering against my ribs, and my legs felt weak, like they might give out any second. We hurried back to the truck, not running but walking fast, constantly looking over our shoulders. The whole way, that smell seemed to follow us, and I kept imagining something moving in the shadows between the trees. When we got to the truck, my hands were so shaky I could barely get the door open. We jumped in, locked the doors, and just sat there for a minute, breathing hard. The cab smelled like old coffee and dirt, but it was a relief compared to what we'd just left. My brother pulled out his phone. We had a weak signal out there, and he called the local forestry service. He explained what we'd found, the footprints, the dead doe, everything. The ranger on the phone sounded calm, almost bored, and said he'd send someone out. We waited by the gate, not wanting to leave until someone showed up. It felt like hours, but it was probably only 30 minutes. The whole time I kept scanning the tree line, expecting to see something huge and dark step out. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Those footprints, they were too big for a human, too human-like for an animal. I remembered stories I'd heard growing up about Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but I always dismissed them as nonsense. Now, though, it didn't seem so crazy. When the ranger arrived, he was a middle-aged guy in a green uniform, looking all official. We showed him the footprints first, and he took photos with his phone. He didn't say much, just nodded. Then we led him to the lean-to and the doe. His expression changed when he saw it. He went from neutral to kinda tense. He circled the area, careful not to step on the tracks, and he muttered something under his breath. "I've seen this before," he said finally. "Not often, but there've been reports. People seeing something big and bipedal in these parts, usually at night or in remote spots like this." My brother and I exchanged looks. "So what is it?" I asked, my voice trembling a little. The ranger shook his head. "Officially, we don't speculate. Could be a bear, could be something else. But between you and me, I've heard enough stories to know it's not just bears." He went on to say that they'd document it, but there wasn't much they could do. "Policy stuff," he said. "They don't investigate these kinds of things unless there's a clear threat." He took some more notes, then told us to be careful if we came back and to call if we saw anything else. As he drove off, my brother and I just stood there by the truck, not saying anything for a long time. The sun was starting to break through the clouds, casting long shadows, but it didn't make things feel any safer. If anything, it made the woods look more menacing, like they were hiding secrets. We got in the truck and drove home, the whole ride in silence. I kept replaying it all in my head. The footprints, the dead doe, that sound, the ranger's words. It felt like a puzzle with missing pieces, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stumbled into something way bigger than us. Back home, I tried to act normal, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that bloody scene. I couldn't eat dinner. My stomach was still in knots. That night, I barely slept. Every creak in the house made me bolt upright, thinking it was that thing outside. Even now, weeks later, I get nervous going into the woods. My brother feels the same. We've talked about it a few times, and he admitted he's had nightmares. We never went back to that spot on the property, not without a group. The ranger never followed up, and as far as I know, nothing else happened out there. But that doesn't make it any less real. What gets me is the not knowing. Was it some kind of animal we've never seen? Or something else? The tracks, the violence. It doesn't fit anything I've ever heard of. And that ranger, he knew more than he let on, I could tell, but he couldn't say it, not officially. So here I am, still wondering, still scared shitless of what might be out there in those woods. And honestly, I don't think I'll ever forget that day. The day I realized that in places like Applegate Lake, there are things we don't understand, and maybe we're not meant to. Story 13. All right, I'll just type this out. I don't know if anyone will believe me, and honestly, I don't even care anymore. I just need to get it out of my head. It's been years, but some days it feels like it was yesterday. I still can't go into the woods, not even a city park. The smell of pine, the sound of branches snapping, it does things to me. My hands are shaking just thinking about it. This was back in October of 2018. I was part of a logging crew working a contract in the Coogan National Forest up in Montana. It was a standard gig, or so we thought. We were a week into a 3-week stint, set up in a temporary camp about a mile from the main logging road. There were 6 of us. Me, the guy who went missing, let's just call him Jay, and 4 others. We didn't use real names much out there, just nicknames or initials. It was that kind of crew. The day it happened started like any other. Cold, bitterly cold. It had snowed overnight, just a light dusting, maybe an inch or two, enough to turn the world white and quiet. That kind of quiet in the mountains. It's heavy. It presses down on you. You hear every little sound, and the absence of sound is even louder. We all slept in our own 2-man tents, spaced out in a rough circle around the central fire pit. I remember waking up that morning because it was so damn quiet. Usually you'd hear Jay rustling around, the clank of his coffee pot, him coughing or humming some old tune. He was always the first one up. But that morning nothing, just the cold and the silence. I crawled out of my sleeping bag, my breath pluming in the air inside my tent. I unzipped the flap and the cold hit me in the face like a slap. I blinked, looking over towards Jay's tent, and my brain just stalled. It didn't compute what I was seeing. His tent wasn't a tent anymore. It was shredded. The green nylon was torn to ribbons, hanging off the poles in tatters. It looked like something had just swiped massive claws through it. The poles themselves were bent. One of them snapped clean in half. I didn't even shout. I think I just made a sound, a kind of choked gasp. I stumbled out of my tent, not even bothering to put my boots on properly, just shoving my feet in and not tying the laces. The other guys were starting to come out now, and I heard the same stunned silence from them, then a string of curses. We all converged on what was left of his tent. The snow around it was a mess. It was trampled, but not by boots. There were deep impressions and there was blood. Not a lot, but enough. Dark red spots and smears stark against the pure white snow. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. This wasn't right. This wasn't a bear. A bear might mess with a food cache, but it wouldn't destroy a tent like this. It was systematic, violent. Then one of the guys, Mike, he pointed a trembling finger away from the tent. "Look," was all he said. There were drag marks. Something heavy had been pulled through the snow, away from the camp and into the tree line, and beside those drag marks, footprints. I'll never forget the sight of those footprints. They were massive. I'm not talking big, I'm talking monstrous. I've seen grizzly prints. These were nothing like that. These were like a man's footprint, but blown up to a nightmare scale. They had to be at least 18 inches long. and the spacing between them. That was the worst part. They were spaced so far apart. The stride was incredible. Whatever made these prints was tall, really tall, and it walked on two legs. That's when the real fear set in. A cold, sinking feeling in my gut that had nothing to do with the morning air. This was something else, something we didn't have a name for. We were all loggers, tough guys, used to handling chainsaws and dealing with the wilderness. But in that moment, we were just scared men. We stood there, staring at those prints, our breath fogging the air, not saying a word. The silence was deafening. The forest around us felt different. It felt watched. We had to do something. We couldn't just stand there. We grabbed our rifles. We always had them for protection, and decided to follow the trail. It was a stupid idea. I know that now. But he was our friend. We had to try. The trail led away from camp into the thick timber. The snow made it easy to follow at first. The drag marks, the blood, and those huge, perfectly defined footprints. We walked in silence, our eyes scanning the trees, every shadow making us jump. The only sounds were our own ragged breathing and the crunch of snow under our boots. We hadn't gone more than a couple hundred yards when we found the first tree. It was a big pine and about 7 feet up the trunk. There were deep gouges in the bark. They weren't claw marks from a cat or a bear climbing. These were parallel gashes, like something had dug 5 huge claws into the trunk and just ripped downwards. The wood was splintered and raw underneath. It was a message, a territorial mark. I didn't need a biologist to tell me that. A little further on, we found a scrap of fabric snagged on a broken branch. It was from Jay's red and black flannel shirt. I recognized it instantly. He wore that shirt almost every day. Seeing that little piece of him just hanging there made it all real. My throat tightened. This wasn't a bad dream. And then there was the smell. It's hard to describe, but I'll never forget it. It was a musky, pungent odor, like a wet dog, but mixed with something else, something foul and ancient, like rotten meat and dirt. It was strongest near the clawed tree and where we found the shirt. It hung in the cold air, a thick, invasive stench that made the back of my throat itch. It was the smell of something alive, something big, and it was very, very close. We kept going, our pace slowing with every step. The blood trail was getting fainter, the drag marks became less distinct, but the footprints, they never wavered. That huge, impossible stride just kept going, deeper and deeper into the forest. The trees were getting thicker, the canopy blocking out most of the grey morning light. It felt like we were walking into a cave. The guy leading us, Mike, he just stopped. He held up a hand. We all froze. The blood trail was gone. It just ended. The drag marks vanished. Only the footprints continued, leading off into a near impenetrable wall of young pines and undergrowth. It was like the ground had just swallowed whatever was left. We stood there at the edge of that thicket, peering into the darkness between the trees. We couldn't go in there. It was too dense, too dark. Our rifles felt like toys. That musky smell was so strong here, it was almost overwhelming. We were all breathing through our mouths, our knuckles white on our gun stocks. That's when we heard it. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a scream. It was a sound I have no words for. A deep, guttural vocalization. It came from deep within that thicket, maybe 50 yards ahead of us. It was low, resonant, and it seemed to vibrate right through my chest. It was a sound of pure power and of warning. It was intelligent. You could hear the intent in it. It was telling us to go no further. We didn't need to be told twice. We looked at each other, and the same primal terror was in all our eyes. We backed away, slowly at first, then turned and practically ran back to camp. We didn't speak. We just ran, stumbling through the snow, expecting to hear those massive footsteps crashing through the trees behind us at any second. We got back to camp, packed our gear in a frantic, chaotic rush, and got the hell out of there in our trucks. We drove to the nearest ranger station and reported him missing. The authorities came. Search and rescue combed the area for days. They found the same things we did, the shredded tent, the blood, the drag marks. They even found the footprints. But in the end, they called it a bear attack, an aggressive rogue bear. Case closed. We tried to tell them. We showed them the stride, the claw marks 7 feet up the tree. We told them about the smell, about the sound. They listened, they nodded, they wrote things down, but you could see it in their eyes. They thought we were spooked, that the trauma of finding our friends camp like that had made us imagine things. They said bears can stand on their hind legs, that snow can distort prints. They had logical, reasonable explanations for everything. But we knew what we saw. We knew what we felt. That wasn't a bear. A bear doesn't have an 18-inch foot and a 12-foot stride. A bear doesn't make claw marks that high up a tree trunk. A bear doesn't make a sound that feels like it's shaking your bones from the inside out. We all quit the site. The company had to bring in a whole new crew, and I heard they had a hell of a time finding anyone willing to work that patch. I never went back to logging. I couldn't. The terror didn't end when we drove away. For weeks afterwards, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, that musky smell in my nostrils. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, and I'd think about the woods. I'd think about how we were just visitors there, and how there are things living in the deep, dark places that we don't understand. Things that are stronger, faster, and smarter than we give them credit for. The worst part, the thing that truly haunts me, is the intelligence we saw in that evidence. The way the tent was systematically destroyed, the territorial claw marks on the tree, the way the trail just vanished, and that sound. That wasn't the mindless roar of an animal. It was a command. It knew we were following it, and it told us to stop. They never found a body. They never found any other trace of Jay. He was just gone, eaten by a bear, the report says. But I know what took him. I saw its footprints in the snow, and I know that somewhere, deep in the Coupin National Forest, it's still out there, and the woods will never be safe again. Story 14. My shift was supposed to be winding down. It was a late patrol, the kind you do more out of habit than anything else. Just a final check on the main trails near the river crossing before heading back to the station. My truck was parked about a mile up the service road, and I was on foot, making my way along the Riverbend Trail. The beam from my flashlight cut a shaky path through the darkness, catching the dripping leaves and the slick, muddy ground. The sound of the river was loud, a constant rushing roar that filled up the whole valley. It was the only thing you could hear, which is why the silence everywhere else felt so thick. I was coming up on the crossing, a wide, shallow part of the river where hikers usually ford. The water was higher than normal, churning and brown with runoff. My light swept across the far bank, and that's when I saw it. At first, it was just a shape, a dark lump against the darker mud. I figured it was a pile of leaves washed up by the storm, or maybe a rotten log. I swung the light back, my boots sinking into the soft earth as I moved closer to the water's edge for a better look. It wasn't a log, it was a backpack, a green nylon day pack, the kind every other hiker carries. But it was torn to shreds. It looked like something had taken a can opener to it. The fabric was ripped in long, ragged strips, and it was covered in a thick, dark mud that was smeared all over it. As I panned the light around, I saw more. A blue fleece jacket snagged on a root, one sleeve almost completely detached, a single hiking boot, a Merrill just lying on its side in the muck. And then I saw the stains. On the torn fabric of the pack, there were darker patches. In the stark white of my flashlight beam, they weren't just mud. Mud is brown. This was a rusty reddish black. It was smeared across the nylon in big sweeping arcs, like something or someone had been dragged. My stomach just dropped. That cold, heavy feeling you get when you know you've stumbled onto something bad. This wasn't lost property. This was a scene. My first thought, my training, was to call it in. My hand went to the radio on my shoulder, my fingers fumbling with the button. The static crackle sounded unnaturally loud. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Unit 4. I'm at the Riverbend crossing. I've got what looks like abandoned gear, a backpack, torn up. There's what appears to be blood on it. Over." My voice sounded thin, swallowed by the noise of the river. I kept my light trained on the backpack, my heart starting to thump a little harder in my chest. I was scanning the opposite tree line, looking for any sign of a hurt hiker, any movement. The dispatcher's voice came back, tinny and distant, telling me to hold my position. That backup was 20 minutes out. 20 minutes. It doesn't sound like long, but out there in the pitch black with that torn-up pack just sitting there, it felt like a lifetime. I was standing there, the roar of the river in my ears, just waiting. That's when my light caught something else. There was a shape just off to the left of the backpack, maybe 15 yards away, right at the edge where the trees started. It was low to the ground, hunched over. I'd missed it before because it was so still and so dark. It just blended into the shadows. I thought it was a rock, a big moss-covered boulder. I shifted the beam, centering it on the shape. It wasn't a rock. The light hit it, and for a second, nothing happened. It was just a large, dark mass, and then it moved. It uncurled. That's the only way I can describe it. It straightened up from its crouch, and it kept straightening. My brain short-circuited. It was tall. So goddamn tall. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, looked almost as wide as the trail itself. The light from my flashlight glinted off wet, matted hair that covered its whole body. It was a dark brown, almost black, and it was plastered to its skin from the rain. I could see its arms, thick as my thighs, hanging down past its knees, and then I saw its face. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen. It had a sloping forehead that ran right into a heavy, ridged brow. Its nose was broad and flat. But it was the eyes that froze me solid. They caught the light and reflected it back at me, 2 points of amber like a wolf's eyes, but higher up. And they were set in this face. A non-human face. It wasn't snarling or growling. It was just looking right at me, and the intelligence in that look, the sheer awareness, sent a jolt of pure, undiluted terror through my whole body. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't move. I was just holding the light on it, this giant thing standing on the other side of the river, staring me down. The radio in my hand was squawking, but it sounded like it was coming from another planet. Then it moved. It didn't lunge. It took a step, then another, its movements fluid and powerful, and it started coming right for me. It came down the bank and into the river, and the way it moved through the water, it didn't struggle. The current that would have knocked a man off his feet barely seemed to slow it down. It took long, heavy strides, water splashing up around its legs, and it was coming straight across. That broke the spell. The fear turned into a live wire in my veins. I stumbled backwards, my boots slipping in the mud. My training screamed at me. The gun. I fumbled for my sidearm, my fingers numb and clumsy. I finally got it out of the holster, the cold metal feeling foreign in my hand. I didn't aim at it. I was too scared, and some part of me still couldn't process that this was real. I pointed the barrel at the ground just in front of me and squeezed the trigger. The sound was deafening, a single sharp crack that ripped through the night, silencing the river for a split second. The muzzle flash was a bright, strobing burst of orange light that lit up the whole scene for a fraction of a heartbeat. In that flash, I saw it. I saw its torso, thick and barrel-chested, muscles coiled under that dark, wet hair. I saw its hands, hanging at its sides, huge and powerful-looking, with thick fingers. The light burned the image into my eyes, and it stopped. It was maybe 20 feet from me, still standing in the knee-deep water. It just froze. I could hear it then over the pounding of my own heart. A sound, a low, guttural breathing, heavy and wet like air being forced through a large pipe. It wasn't a growl, it was the sound of exertion, of pure, raw power held in check. It stood there, its amber eyes locked on me. I could feel the weight of its gaze. I was still pointing my gun, my arms shaking so bad I couldn't have hit the broadside of a barn. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, just staring at each other across that short stretch of river. Then it let out a sound. It wasn't a roar. It was a deep, rumbling huff, a puff of air that I could hear from where I stood. And it turned. It turned its massive body away from me and started walking back the way it came. It didn't run. It just walked, with that same powerful, deliberate stride back across the river, up the far bank, past the torn backpack and into the wall of trees. It didn't look back. 1 second it was there, and the next, the darkness had swallowed it whole. I don't know how long I stood there. My whole body was trembling, a fine, uncontrollable shake. The smell of gunpowder hung in the damp air. The river kept rushing. It was like the world had just reset, but I was stuck in the nightmare. I finally managed to lower my gun, my arm aching. I clicked the safety back on with a hand that felt like it belonged to someone else. It took me another few minutes to get my legs to work. I had to get out of there. I started backing away, my light sweeping frantically across the far bank, expecting it to come bursting back out of the trees at any second. I didn't turn my back until I was a good 50 yards up the trail. Then I half walked, half ran, my lungs burning, back to my truck. When the other rangers showed up, 2 of them in a truck, I must have looked like a ghost. I was pale and shaking, and I could barely get my words out. We went back to the crossing with high-powered lights. The backpack was still there, the jacket, the shoe, and then we saw the footprints. In the soft, wet mud of the far bank, leading from the river into the trees, were a line of footprints. We shined our lights on them, and a cold dread settled deep in my gut. They were huge, I mean monstrously huge. One of the other rangers, a guy named Carl, who'd been there even longer than me, pulled out a measuring tape. He laid it down next to one of the clearest prints, 17.5 inches long. It was a bare foot, with a clear ball, a distinct arch, and 5 toes. The stride was enormous, like something an NBA player would take, but heavier, the impressions deep and solid. This wasn't a bear. Bears have paws. This was a foot, a bipedal foot. We followed the trail a short way into the woods, but the prints faded out once we hit the leaf litter. It was just gone. The next day, a search team found a hiker a few miles downstream. He was a mess, dehydrated and terrified, with a broken arm and deep scratches all over his back and legs. He said he'd been attacked by a bear. He said it came out of nowhere, ripped his pack off, and he just ran. He said he was lucky to be alive. They brought him to the ranger station, and I saw the injuries myself. The scratches were parallel, deep gouges. The medics said they were consistent with a large animal. But the other rangers and I, we looked at each other, and we knew, we all knew, a bear doesn't make a 17-inch human-like footprint. A bear doesn't stand up and stare you down with amber eyes that hold a terrifying kind of understanding. A bear doesn't stop its charge because of a warning shot. It either runs or it keeps coming. The official report says it was a bear attack. The hiker believes it was a bear. But me and the other guys who were there that night, we don't talk about it much. When we do, it's in low voices, with a certain look in our eyes. We know what we saw. We know what was standing in that river, and I know with a certainty that keeps me up some nights that it wasn't any animal we have a name for. It was something else, something old, and something that should have stayed in the dark parts of the map, where we don't have to think about it. I still have my job. I still walk those trails, but I never, ever go out after a heavy rain, and I always carry more than just a warning shot in the chamber. Story 15. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while now, and I don't really know how to start, but I need to get it out there. Maybe writing it down will help, or maybe it'll just make it worse, I don't know. But here goes nothing. It was a Tuesday, late in the afternoon, and my brother-in-law and I were driving east on Lucia Falls Road in Washington. We'd been out that way before, mostly just to kill time or take a scenic route back from a fishing trip we'd cut short because the weather was turning. The sky was overcast, not quite raining, but that heavy grey that makes everything feel damp and cold. We were in his pickup truck, an old Ford that rattled a bit on the gravel parts of the road, and we were talking about nothing important, sports, work, the usual stuff. I remember feeling pretty relaxed, just cruising along with the windows down a crack, the air smelling like pine and wet earth. Then, out of nowhere, there was this flash of light. It wasn't like lightning or anything I'd ever seen before. It was quick, bright, and seemed to come from the woods off to the right side of the road. It lit up the trees for a second, like someone had flicked a giant flashlight on and off. My brother-in-law slammed on the brakes, and the truck skidded a little on the damp pavement. We both just sat there for a second, staring at each other. "What the hell was that?" he said, and I shrugged, because I had no idea. My heart was already starting to beat faster, that kind of jumpy feeling you get when something unexpected happens. We decided to pull over and check it out. I mean, it could have been a car accident or someone in trouble, right? So we pulled onto the shoulder, gravel crunching under the tires, and got out. The air felt heavy and still, like the woods were holding their breath. I remember looking around, squinting into the trees, but I didn't see anything at first. Then, for a split second, I thought I saw a large man standing near the back of the truck. He was tall, way taller than anyone I've ever seen, and bulky, like a football player, but bigger. He was just standing there, not moving, and then he was gone. Vanished, like he'd never been there at all. I blinked a couple of times, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me because of the dim light, but the image stuck in my head. It was so real. I could have sworn I saw the shape of him, dark against the darker trees. I told my brother-in-law what I saw, and he laughed it off at first, saying I was probably just spooked, but I couldn't shake it. The whole thing felt wrong. We decided to investigate further, so I went back to the truck to grab a spotlight we keep in the back and my cell phone. The spotlight is one of those heavy-duty ones, with a bright beam that can cut through the dark, and I figured it might help us see what was out there. My hands were a little shaky as I fumbled with the door handle, and I remember thinking how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, just this eerie silence that made my skin crawl. Once I had the spotlight and my phone, we started walking toward where the flash had come from. The ground was soft and muddy from recent rain, and our boots sank in with each step. We followed a rough path that led away from the road toward some railroad tracks that run through the area. I've been on those tracks before. They're old and mostly unused, with weeds growing between the ties. As we got closer, the silence got heavier, and I started feeling this growing dread in my gut. It was like something was watching us, but I couldn't see anything. I kept sweeping the spotlight around, the beam cutting through the trees, but all I saw were shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. My brother-in-law was a few steps ahead of me, and he called out, "Hello? Anyone out here?" His voice sounded small and swallowed up by the woods. There was no echo, nothing, just dead air. I joined in, shouting, "Hey, if someone's hurt, we're here to help." But no one answered. The only sound was our footsteps and the occasional crunch of leaves underfoot. I remember my throat feeling dry, and I had to swallow hard a couple of times. The spotlight felt heavy in my hand, and I kept adjusting my grip because my palms were sweating. We reached the railroad tracks and decided to split up to cover more ground. He went left and I went right, agreeing to meet back in 10 minutes or so. I started walking along the tracks, calling out for him every now and then, but the silence was so thick it felt like it was pushing back at me. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I could feel the hair on my arms standing up. I kept telling myself it was just the woods being creepy. I've spent enough time outdoors to know that places can feel spooky for no reason. But this was different. This felt intentional, like something didn't want us there. After a few minutes, I stopped and listened. Nothing. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of leaves. It was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Then, from somewhere off to my left, I heard footsteps. Not like ours. Heavier, slower. Like something big was moving through the underbrush. My blood ran cold. I swung the spotlight toward the sound, but the beam just hit trees and darkness. I called out, "Hello? Is that you?" Thinking it might be my brother-in-law, but no one answered. The footsteps kept coming, steady and deliberate, and they were getting closer. I felt this primal fear kick in, the kind that makes you want to run and hide. I started backing away, my legs feeling weak, and I almost tripped over a railroad tie. That's when I heard my brother-in-law's voice from behind me. He was calling my name, but it sounded strained, like he was out of breath. I turned and saw him stumbling out of the trees, his clothes torn and muddy, and his face pale as a ghost. He looked terrified, eyes wide, breathing ragged. I rushed over to him, asking what happened, but he could barely get the words out. He was shaking so hard I had to steady him, and I could feel the cold sweat on his skin. He told me he'd been walking along the tracks when he saw it, a huge, hairy creature shaped like a man, standing by the rails. He said it was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, with broad shoulders and arms that hung down almost to its knees. The hair was dark and matted, like it had been out in the elements for a long time, and it just stood there, staring at him. He said they locked eyes, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then he heard it breathing, a deep, raspy sound that seemed to vibrate through the air. It wasn't like any animal he'd ever heard. It was too human, but not quite. The sound terrified him so much that he turned and ran, not looking back. He fell multiple times, scrambling through the mud and bushes until he found his way back to me. As he was talking, I could see the fear in his eyes, and it made my own stomach twist. I believed him instantly because I'd seen that figure earlier, even if it was just a glimpse. We stood there for a minute, both of us shaking, and then we decided to get the hell out of there. We hurried back to the truck, not saying much, just wanting to be somewhere safe. The whole way, I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something following us, but the woods stayed dark and silent. When we got back to the road, we took a quick look around for any sign of a crash or something that could have caused the flash, but there was nothing. No broken glass, no tire marks, nothing. It was like it never happened. We drove home in silence, the only sound the hum of the engine and the occasional patter of rain starting to fall. My brother-in-law was curled up in his seat, staring out the window, and I could tell he was deeply shaken. He's a tough guy, not the type to spook easily, but that night he looked like a kid who'd seen a monster. And me? I'm haunted by what I saw earlier, that large man near the truck vanishing into thin air. I can't stop thinking about it, especially when I'm trying to sleep. I'll close my eyes and see that dark shape, or hear my brother-in-law's description of the creature and its breathing. I've read enough stories online to know that people talk about Sasquatch in these parts, and I used to think it was all nonsense. But now, I don't know what to believe. All I know is that something happened out there on Lucia Falls Road, something I can't explain, and it left both of us changed. I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, sweating and heart racing, and I have to check the windows to make sure nothing's outside. My brother-in-law doesn't like to talk about it much anymore. He just gets quiet if I bring it up. But every time I drive down that road, even in daylight, I feel a chill run down my spine. I keep wondering if we were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or if there's something out there that doesn't want to be found. Either way, I don't think I'll ever forget that day, and I doubt I'll ever feel completely safe in the woods again. Story 16. All right, I'm just going to type this out because it's been weighing on me for years and I need to get it off my chest. I've never told this to many people, just my family, and even then they kind of shrug it off like I'm spinning a yarn. But this is real. It happened to me back in the late 80s, I'd say, around 1988 or 89, when I was working up in the mountains north of Terrace, British Columbia. I was a logger then, had been for most of my life, and I'd seen plenty of weird stuff in the bush, but nothing like this. Nothing that ever stuck with me the way this did. That day started like any other in that part of the world, grey and wet. It had been raining for what felt like weeks, just a constant drizzle that soaked everything through. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and pine, and the ground was mush underfoot. I was operating a D9 Cat, one of those big bulldozers, on a steep slope we were trying to clear for a new logging road. The job was tough because the grade was sharp, and with all the rain, the soil was saturated like trying to build on a sponge. I remember feeling uneasy from the get-go, not scared exactly, but just on edge. Maybe it was the weather or the isolation. We were miles from camp, just me and the machine and the endless trees. I'd been at it for a few hours, pushing dirt and rocks, trying to carve out a path. The Cat was loud, its engine roaring in my ears, and the cab vibrated with every move. I was focused on the work, keeping an eye on the slope ahead, when something down in the draw caught my attention. At first, I thought it was a shadow or maybe a bear. We had plenty of those around, but then it moved, and I realized it was too big, too upright. My heart kind of skipped a beat. I eased off the throttle and squinted through the rain-streaked window. That's when I saw it clearly. A dark, hairy creature standing at the base of the draw. It had to be over 7 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they looked almost unnatural. Its arms were thick, like logs themselves, and it didn't seem to have much of a neck. Its head just sort of sat on top of its torso. The hair was matted and dark, almost black, and it moved with a kind of deliberate grace that made my skin crawl. It wasn't stumbling around like an animal, it was purposeful, like it knew what it was doing. I just sat there, frozen for a second, my hands gripping the controls. I'd heard stories from other loggers about things in the woods, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it, but I'd always brushed them off as tall tales. Now, seeing this thing, I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. It picked up a log from the ground, a hefty piece of timber that should have taken 2 men to lift, and it held it like it was nothing. Then it started smashing it against a nearby stump, not in a random way, but in this rhythmic knocking, boom, 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 like it was beating a drum. The sound echoed up the slope, cutting through the noise of the cat, and it was unnerving as hell. Each knock felt like it was hitting me in the chest. I don't know how long I watched, but I knew I had to get out of there. My instinct was to back up, get some distance. I shifted the cat into reverse, but the ground was so wet and slick that the tracks just spun in the mud. The more I tried, the more the machine seemed to sink, and the knocking from below, it got faster, louder, more intense. It was like the creature was egging me on, or maybe warning me. I could feel the vibrations through the seat, and my breath started coming in short gasps. The air in the cab felt heavy, and I was sweating despite the cold. Then it happened. The middle of the slope, right where I'd been working, just gave way. It wasn't a slow slide, it was sudden, like the earth had decided to let go all at once. The ground beneath the cat buckled, and I felt the machine lurch forward. My heart slammed against my ribs, and I knew I was in trouble. I tried to steer to gain control, but it was useless. The cat started sliding downhill, picking up speed, and the world outside turned into a blur of mud and trees. I remember screaming, but I don't think any sound came out. Adrenaline shot through me, and I knew I had to jump. It was a split-second decision: stay and ride it out, or risk bailing. I shoved the door open and leapt, hitting the ground hard. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I tumbled through the mud, rocks scraping against my clothes and skin. I came to a stop against a fallen log, gasping for air, my body aching all over. As I pushed myself up, covered in muck, I looked back at the cat. It was still sliding, a massive hunk of metal careening down the slope, and that's when I saw the creature again. It sprinted from the trees, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen, a blur of dark fur and muscle. In one fluid motion, it leaped onto the back of the sliding cat, landing in a crouch. Its hair whipped around in the wind, and it adjusted its balance with each jolt of the machine, like it was riding a wave. I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing. The creature looked powerful, almost majestic in a twisted way, and for a moment it felt like I was watching something from another world. The slide carried them both down into the valley, out of sight, and the noise faded into the sound of rain and my own ragged breathing. I just lay there, shaking, trying to process what I'd seen. My clothes were soaked, my hands were scraped raw, and every muscle in my body felt like jelly. The fear was still there, a cold weight in my chest, but mixed with this weird sense of awe. I'd never felt so small, so insignificant. After a while, I managed to stand up and stumble back toward camp. It took me what felt like hours to reach the others, my legs wobbly and my mind racing. When I told them what happened, they were skeptical at first, thought I'd hit my head or something. But later that day, a few of us went back to where the cat had ended up. The machine was a wreck, buried in mud and debris, and nearby we found tracks, deep, wide footprints, bigger than any bear's, leading off into the trees. They were spaced far apart, like whatever made them was moving fast. No one had any explanations. We just stood there staring until the rain picked up again and we had to head back. I never saw the creature again after that day. We finished the job eventually, but I was always on edge, always looking over my shoulder. The image of it riding that cat, hair flying, stuck with me. It's been decades now, and I've retired from logging. But sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night, remembering that knock, that slide, that powerful form perched on the machine. I can't explain it, and I don't try to. It's just one of those things that happened out there in the wild. A reminder that there are dangers we don't understand and maybe never will. Story 17. I was driving my old Ford F-150, a truck I'd had for years and knew every rattle and hum of. My son was in the passenger seat, slumped against the window, half asleep. The radio was on low, just some staticky classic rock station fading in and out. Highway 404 through Sussex County, Delaware, is a dark road at night, really dark. It's mostly just 2 lanes cutting through flat farmland and patches of woods, and after 11 p.m. you might not see another car for 10, 15 minutes at a stretch. The only light comes from your own headlights, and they just push back the darkness a little ways, making the trees on either side look like solid black walls. I was tired, my eyes feeling gritty, just focusing on the yellow line in the middle of the road. The truck's engine was a steady, familiar drone. I had the window cracked open a bit, and the air coming in was cool and smelled like cut grass and damp earth. It was quiet, peaceful even. My son's breathing was slow and even, and I was just counting down the miles until I could fall into my own bed. It was just after 1 in the morning. I remember glancing at the green glow of the dashboard clock. 1:03. I was thinking about nothing in particular, just the road, when something moved at the very edge of my headlights. My first thought was a deer. You see a lot of deer on these roads, and they have a way of freezing in your lights, their eyes glowing. But this was different. It was big, and it was already walking, not frozen at all. It stepped out from the right-hand tree line, right into my lane. I took my foot off the gas, my heart giving a single hard thump in my chest. My headlights caught it full on for a second, and my brain just stuttered. It wasn't a deer. It was walking on 2 legs, upright, like a man. But it wasn't a man. It was massive. I mean, the shoulders on this thing were unbelievably wide. Later, I'd tried to measure it out in my head, and I kept coming back to the width of my truck's hood, which is about 4 feet. Its shoulders were like that, just impossibly broad and powerful looking. It was covered in hair, a dark, fuzzy, brownish black that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. It wasn't shaggy like a bear, it was more like a thick, dense coat. It didn't run. It didn't even look at us. It just walked. It crossed the road in 4 long, smooth, effortless strides. Its arms swung naturally at its sides like a person's would. There was no hurry, no panic. It moved with a purpose, like it was just going from one place to another, and the road was a minor inconvenience. The way it moved was the most unsettling part. It was so fluid, so confident. It passed through the cones of my headlights, and then, just as a car coming from the opposite direction swept its own beams across the road, it stepped into the trees on the left and was gone. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds. My truck had slowed to a crawl almost on its own, my foot hovering over the brake. I was just staring at the empty spot where it had been. My mind was screaming, trying to find a box to put this thing in. A bear? No, bears don't walk like that. They hunch. This thing was tall, maybe 7 feet or more, and it walked straight up. A person in a suit? No way. The proportions were all wrong, and the movement was too organic, too real. That's when my son shouted. It wasn't a yell of surprise. It was a sharp, terrified gasp of air. Dad! I jerked my head to look at him. He was bolt upright, his hands pressed against the dashboard, his eyes wide and fixed on the trees where the thing had disappeared. His face was pale in the dim light. There were 2 of them, he said, his voice tight and high. Did you see the other one? My blood went cold. I only saw the big one, I said, my own voice sounding strange and thin. There was a smaller one, he said, not looking at me, still staring out the window. It was right behind it. It came out after the big one. It was only chest high to the big one. It walked just like it did. He described it in a rush, the words tumbling out. He said they both had the same fuzzy shape, the same dark hair. The smaller one had the same swinging arms, the same smooth, fast walk. It had followed the big one across the road and vanished into the same patch of darkness. I brought the truck to a complete stop, right there in the middle of the lane. The other car, the one coming the opposite way, sped past us. It was a sedan, and I caught a glimpse of a man and a woman inside talking. They were completely oblivious. They hadn't seen a thing. They just drove on, their taillights getting smaller and smaller, leaving us alone in this huge, dark silence. I put my hazards on, the tick-tick-tick sound unnaturally loud. My hands were shaking. I could feel a cold sweat on the back of my neck. I turned the steering wheel and angled my headlights toward the tree line where they'd vanished. The high beams cut into the darkness, illuminating a wall of leaves and trunks. Nothing moved. There was no sound, no cracking twigs, no rustling. It was just still, eerily still, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. You saw it, right, Dad? My son asked, his voice quieter now, pleading. You saw the big one? I saw it, I said, and saying it out loud made it more real and more terrifying. What the hell was that? We just sat there for a minute, maybe 2, staring into the empty woods. My mind was racing, trying to find an explanation. A prank, out here, at 1 in the morning with something that big. No, an animal? Nothing I'd ever seen, read about, or even heard of in a tall tale moved like that. It walked with a stride that was both powerful and graceful, a cross between a man's walk and an ape's. But it wasn't clumsy like an ape. It was efficient. It was built for that movement. The fear was a physical thing now. It was a tightness in my chest, a cold ball in my stomach. It was the feeling of the hairs on my arms and the back of my neck standing straight up. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, a hard, frantic rhythm. I kept scanning the tree line, my eyes straining, expecting to see a pair of eyes looking back, or that huge, dark shape emerging from the shadows. But there was nothing. We should go, my son whispered. He was right. Sitting there felt wrong. It felt exposed. I put the truck back in drive and started moving again, slowly, I kept my speed down to maybe 20 miles an hour, my eyes flicking from the road ahead to the rearview mirror to the side mirrors. I was looking for any sign of movement, any hint that we were being followed. The inside of the truck felt different. The comfortable silence was gone, replaced by a heavy, tense quiet. The hum of the engine wasn't soothing anymore. It felt like we were making too much noise. The darkness outside the windows wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibilities, and all of them were bad. My son was doing the same thing I was, constantly looking out his window, then checking the side mirror. He had one hand on the door handle, like he was ready for something. We didn't speak for a long time. There wasn't much to say. We had both seen it. We both knew that what we had seen was impossible, and that knowing it was impossible didn't change the fact that it had happened. He was the one who broke the silence. "Its arms," he said, his voice low. "They swung, like yours or mine do when you walk. They didn't just hang there." I nodded, my throat tight. He was right. That was a detail that had registered, but I hadn't fully processed. It wasn't a lurch or a shamble. It was a natural, rhythmic swing. It made it seem even less like an animal and more like something else. Something that knew how to walk on two legs as its primary way of moving. And it never looked at us, I added, almost to myself. It just didn't care we were there. That was maybe the most chilling part of all. A deer would have bolted. A bear might have stood its ground or run. A person would have looked, would have reacted to the headlights. This thing had just ignored us completely. We were irrelevant. We were just background noise. It had its own business to attend to, and 2 tons of metal and glass speeding toward it wasn't even worth a glance. Every shadow on the side of the road looked like a crouching figure. Every clump of bushes seemed to hold a hidden shape. The drive felt endless. Every mile marker we passed was a small victory, but home felt 1,000 miles away. The heaviness of the night air pressed in on the truck. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating blanket. I've never felt so small, so vulnerable as I did in that truck cab, with just that thin sheet of glass between us and whatever was out there. We were both straining our ears, listening for any sound over the engine and the road noise. A thump on the roof. A scrape against the side. Something following us, keeping pace just out of sight in the trees. The memory of that smooth, powerful stride was burned into my brain. I could see it every time I blinked. The wide shoulders, the dark, fuzzy silhouette against the headlights, the effortless way it covered the ground. We didn't see anything else. No more figures, no eyes in the darkness, just the long, dark road and the silent, watching woods. When we finally crossed the bridge into Annapolis and saw the lights of the city, it was like surfacing from a deep dive. The tension didn't leave my body all at once, but it slowly began to uncoil. My shoulders, which I hadn't realized were hunched up around my ears, started to relax. We pulled into our driveway, and I shut off the engine. The sudden silence was profound. We just sat there for a few minutes, not saying anything. The house was dark, the neighborhood was asleep. The whole world was normal, but it didn't feel normal anymore. It felt like a mask. We went inside and I locked the door behind us, checking the deadbolt twice. My son went straight to his room, and I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water with hands that were still not quite steady. We didn't talk about it again that night. What was there to say? The next day, in the bright, rational light of the morning, it felt like a bad dream, but we both knew it wasn't. A few weeks later, driven by a need for some kind of answer, I started looking online. I found a forum, a place where people talked about strange things they'd seen in the woods. And I found them. Other reports from Sussex County, Delaware, from people driving on 404 or on back roads near there. Descriptions of large, upright, hairy figures crossing the road. Sometimes one, sometimes a pair. A big one and a smaller one. People describing that same smooth, fast walk, that same utter lack of fear. Reading those accounts didn't make me feel better. It didn't solve the mystery. It just confirmed the fear. It meant we weren't crazy. It meant that what we saw was real. And that was somehow worse, because if it's real, then it's still out there, and it doesn't care that we're here. That was more than 20 years ago. My son is a grown man now. We've talked about it a handful of times since, always in hushed tones, never for long. The details never change, the wide shoulders, the 4 steps, the smaller one following, the feeling of the world tilting off its axis for those 3 seconds on a dark highway. I still drive that road sometimes to go fishing. I never do it at night, and every single time as I pass that stretch of trees, my hands tighten on the wheel, and I can't help but look, and I still see it, just for a split second in my mind's eye. I see it stepping out of the shadows, walking like it owns the world, and then it's gone. Story 18. Okay, so I've never really talked about this before, not in full detail anyway, but it's one of those things that stuck with me for years, and sometimes I'll just be sitting around, and it all comes rushing back. I was a logger up in British Columbia back in the late 80s, and let me tell you, that job wasn't for the faint of heart. Remote areas, thick forests, and days where you'd go hours without seeing another soul. This one day, though, it was a Tuesday, I think, sometime in early October, changed everything for me. The air was crisp, and you could smell that mix of pine and damp earth that just hangs in the air up there. I was working alone in this patch we'd been clearing for a couple weeks, way off the main road. My crew had moved on to another site, but I was behind because one of the skidders had busted a hydraulic line, so I was stuck finishing up solo. I remember waking up that morning feeling kinda off, like something was in the air, not in a spooky way, just heavy. I'd packed my lunch like always, a couple sandwiches, an apple and a thermos of coffee, and headed out before the sun was fully up. The drive to the site took about an hour on these rough logging roads, bouncing around in my truck with the radio crackling static because we were so far from anything. When I got there, the mist was still clinging to the trees, and it was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. I was running a fella buncher, this big machine that cuts and grabs trees, and the plan was to clear a section near a creek bed. I'd been at it for a few hours, the engine roaring and the saw buzzing when things started to get weird. It was around mid-morning, I'd say. The sun had burned off most of the fog, and I was in a rhythm, just focusing on not messing up the cut. Then I heard this clinking sound, like small rocks hitting the metal side of the machine. At first I thought it was nothing, maybe pebbles kicking up from the tracks or something, but it kept happening, little taps here and there. I figured one of the crew had come back to check on me, maybe playing a joke. We did that sometimes, tossing stones to get each other's attention when the equipment was too loud to shout over. So I didn't think much of it, just shrugged and kept working. But the sounds didn't stop. They got more frequent and louder, not random like they were aimed. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, this uneasy feeling creeping in. I shut off the engine for a minute to listen. When that machine's running, it's deafening, so turning it off was like stepping into a different world. The forest went dead silent, except for the occasional bird chirp or rustle of leaves. Then another rock hit the cab, this time with a sharper ping. It came from the tree line to my left, where the woods were thick and dark. I leaned out the window squinting, but I couldn't see anyone. "Hey, knock it off!" I yelled, thinking it was Dave or one of the guys messing with me. No answer, just silence. That's when I started to feel really uneasy. My heart was beating a little faster, and I had this urge to just get back to work and ignore it. But part of me was curious, or maybe stubborn. I decided to climb down and take a look. The machine was tall, so I had to use the ladder on the side, my boots scraping against the rungs. As soon as my feet hit the ground, the air felt colder, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. I remember the crunch of pine needles under my boots and the way my breath fogged in front of me. I walked toward where the rocks were coming from, maybe 20, 30 feet away, into the edge of the forest, and then I saw it. My blood went cold. Standing between 2 big cedars was this thing. I don't even know how to describe it without sounding crazy, but I'll try. It was massive, like 8 or 9 feet tall, and covered in dark, matted hair that looked almost black in the shadows. Its shoulders were wide, broader than any man's I'd ever seen, and it stood upright just like a person, but with this powerful, confident stance. It wasn't moving much, just kind of poised there, and it had one arm cocked back like it was about to throw another rock. The way it moved was human-like, smooth and deliberate, but everything about it was wrong. It didn't make a sound, no breathing, no rustling, nothing, just silence. I froze. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground, and I could hear my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. My mouth went dry, and I remember my hands shaking so bad I had to clench them into fists. This thing was staring right at me, but I couldn't see its eyes clearly, just this dark shape with a head that seemed too big for its body. It didn't look aggressive, not exactly, but it felt displeased, like I was intruding on its space, and it wanted me gone. The air around us was so still, it was suffocating. I've been in tight spots before, close calls with falling trees, machinery malfunctions, but this was different. This was pure, primal fear. I felt small, vulnerable, like a kid facing something he can't understand. For what felt like minutes, we just stood there, me staring at it staring back. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Was it a bear? No! Bears don't stand like that, and they don't throw rocks. This was something else, something I'd heard whispers about but never believed. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. In that moment, it didn't matter what it was called. It was real, and it was right in front of me. I could smell this musky odor like wet dog and earth that made my stomach churn. My skin was crawling, and I had this intense urge to run. But I was too scared to move. What if it charged? What if it was faster than me? Then, without thinking, I made a decision. I had to get back to the machine. Slowly, carefully, I started backing away, my eyes locked on it. Every step felt like it took forever, and I was terrified that any sudden movement would set it off. It didn't follow me, just watched. When I reached the ladder, I scrambled up so fast I almost slipped. My hands were sweaty, and I fumbled with the door handle before finally getting inside the cab. The familiar smell of diesel and grease hit me, but it didn't comfort me like it usually did. I was shaking all over, my breath coming in short gasps. I knew I had to start the engine. Maybe the noise would scare it off, or at least give me a way to get out of there. My fingers trembled as I turned the key, and for a second, nothing happened. My heart sank. Then the engine roared to life, that loud grinding sound filling the air, and that's when it moved. The figure turned its head almost casually, and then it just walked away. Not running, not hurrying, but with this smooth, confident stride that made it seem even bigger. It disappeared into the trees like it had never been there, and the forest went quiet again, except for the rumble of the machine. I sat there for I don't know how long, just gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The adrenaline was crashing, and I felt dizzy, like I might throw up. I kept replaying it in my head, the way it stood, the way it threw those rocks, the sheer size of it. I wanted to drive away right then, but I forced myself to finish the day. I didn't want to leave any evidence that something was wrong in case someone asked questions. So I went back to work, cutting trees on autopilot, but my mind wasn't in it. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept glancing at the tree line, half expecting to see it again. When I finally packed up and drove back to camp, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the trees. The whole ride, I kept checking my mirrors, paranoid that something was following me. Back at camp, the guys were gathered around a fire, laughing and drinking beer. I wanted to tell them, to get it off my chest, but the words wouldn't come. How do you say something like that without sounding insane? Hey, I saw a giant hairy thing in the woods today. They'd have laughed me out of there, so I just kept quiet, nodded along to their stories, and went to bed early. But I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure standing there, It wasn't until a few weeks later that I mentioned anything. We were on a break, and an older guy named Carl, he'd been logging for 30 years, started talking about strange things he'd seen in the woods over the years. He said he'd once spotted something big and dark moving through the trees, and he heard odd calls that didn't sound like any animal he knew. I didn't give details, just said I'd had a weird experience too, and he nodded like he understood. He told me, "Some things out here you just don't talk about." That was it. No big revelation, but it confirmed it for me. I wasn't crazy. I'd seen something real. To this day, I can't explain what happened. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head, and it always comes back to that moment. Standing there, frozen, facing something I couldn't comprehend. I never saw it again, and I quit logging not long after, moved on to something else. But sometimes, when I'm in a quiet place, I'll remember the way it looked at me, and I'll get this chill down my spine. It's like a piece of me is still out there in those woods, wondering what else is hiding in the shadows. Story 19. It was one of those perfect Michigan summer days, the kind that seem to stretch on forever when you're 14. The air was warm, but not heavy. The sky was that clear, endless blue, and the only thing on my mind was the feeling of the wind against my old jacket. I was on my Honda 100, this little dirt bike that was my entire world. It wasn't fancy, it was beat up and loud, but it was my ticket to freedom. That day, I decided to just explore. I lived in a rural area, so the world was basically my backyard, a network of dirt roads and 2 tracks carved through the woods. I'd been riding for maybe an hour, just following my whim. I knew the main roads, like Fence Lake Road, but the smaller paths branching off were a mystery. I loved that. I turned onto Petticat Lake Road, a narrow, sandy track that was more of a suggestion than a road. The trees closed in overhead, creating a green tunnel, and the sun came down in dappled patches. I remember the smell so clearly, that mix of hot pine needles, dry earth, and the faint, sweet scent of wildflowers. The buzz of the engine was a constant vibration under me, a sound I found comforting. I was just puttering along, not in any hurry, standing up on the pegs a little to absorb the bumps. I remember looking at the odometer, watching the tenths of a mile slowly click over. I was probably going 15-20 miles an hour at most. That's when I saw it. To my right, almost completely hidden by a wall of thick ferns and young saplings, was an opening. It wasn't a road, not really. It was an overgrown driveway, the kind that made you wonder what was at the end of it. The urge to find out was immediate and powerful. That's what exploration was all about. I throttled down and aimed the front wheel into the gap. It was a tight squeeze. The brush was thick, scraping against my jeans and the sides of the bike. Thorny branches from wild raspberry bushes snagged on my sleeves. I had to crawl with the bike, feeding it just enough power to keep moving forward without stalling, weaving between trees. The handlebars kept getting caught on things, and I had to use my feet to push off tree trunks to keep going. It was slow, awkward going. The green gloom got deeper the further I went in, the canopy so thick it felt like late evening, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. The air grew still and cool, and the sound of my bike seemed obnoxiously loud in the silence. After what felt like 5 minutes of this struggle, maybe 50 yards in, the path suddenly opened up. It was like stepping into a cathedral. The trees pulled back to form a small circular clearing, maybe 40 feet across. The ground was covered in a soft, springy moss and old brown pine needles, and right in the center of it all was a cabin. It wasn't just any cabin, it was abandoned, and it had been for a long, long time. The wood was silver gray and weathered, splintered and cracked. One of the 2 front windows was completely gone, just a dark, gaping hole. The other had a single, grimy pane of glass still hanging in there. The roof sagged in the middle like a tired old back. There was a stone chimney on one side, part of it collapsed into a pile of rubble. The whole place had a feeling of profound sadness, like it had just given up and was slowly being swallowed by the woods. I killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was absolute. No birds, no insects, nothing, just a heavy, waiting quiet. I was just sitting there on my bike, taking it all in, my heart beating a little faster from the excitement of the discovery. This was cool. This was a real find. I was mentally planning on coming back with my friends to check it out properly. I was looking at the cabin, trying to see if there was a way inside that wasn't too dangerous, when movement caught my eye. It was on the far side of the clearing, where the trail seemed to continue on into the woods. Something big broke from the tree line and ran across the path. It was about 30 yards away, a distance I could judge pretty well from shooting targets with my dad. My brain short-circuited. It was running on two legs, upright, like a man, but it wasn't a man. It was huge. The first thing that registered was the sheer size of it. It was tall and powerfully built, with broad shoulders that tapered down. Its body was covered in what looked like dark, matted hair, a deep brownish black that seemed to absorb the light. It wasn't loping or clumsy, it was running, and it was fast, unbelievably fast. It moved with a fluid, powerful grace, like a professional athlete at a full sprint. Its legs pumped, its arms swung in a coordinated motion, and it covered the 20-foot width of the trail in 2, maybe 3 strides. It was so sure-footed, so explosive. For one split second, my mind, desperately trying to make sense of the impossible, offered up the dumbest explanation: a gorilla costume. Someone in a really good gorilla suit, running through the Michigan woods. But that thought evaporated as soon as it formed. It was preposterous. There was no one out here. The suit, if it was a suit, moved with the creature. It wasn't baggy or awkward. It was its skin, and the speed. No person in a suit could move like that. The sheer, raw power in its movement was terrifying. It was there, and then it was gone, vanishing into the thick undergrowth on the other side of the path. The whole thing lasted less than 2 seconds. But in that 2 seconds, a cold, sharp terror stabbed through my entire body. It wasn't just fear, it was a primal, gut-level horror that bypassed all thought. My heart didn't just beat faster, it felt like it seized in my chest, then exploded into a frantic, painful hammering against my ribs. My breath caught in my throat, every hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up. A cold sweat instantly broke out all over my skin, soaking through my t-shirt under my jacket. I didn't think. There was no thought. There was only a single screaming command in my head: go now. My body moved on its own. I stomped down on the gear shift, forcing the bike into first with a loud clunk. I twisted the throttle all the way, yanking it back so hard I thought the grip might break. The little Honda screamed, the front wheel lifting off the ground for a second as it lunged forward. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was frozen in a crouch over the handlebars, my eyes locked on the narrow, brush-choked path ahead. Getting in had been a careful, slow process. Getting out was a panicked, violent crash. I gunned the engine, aiming for gaps that were almost too small. Branches whipped and slashed at my face and arms. I remember the sharp sting as one caught me across the cheek. I didn't even flinch. Thorns ripped at my clothes. I heard a sickening crunch and felt a jolt as the left foot peg snapped off, sheared clean by a thick, low-hanging branch I'd squeezed under. A second later, the mirror on that side was torn away with a sound of scraping metal and breaking plastic. I didn't care. I would have driven the bike straight through a brick wall if it was between me and the main road. The world had shrunk to the tunnel of green in front of me and the screaming whine of the engine. My knuckles were white on the grips. My arms were rigid with tension. I could feel every single bump in the path jarring up through the frame and into my bones. But it was like I was feeling it from a distance. The only thing that was real was the terror, a cold, heavy weight in my stomach. Then I saw it. The break in the trees, the open space of Petticat Lake Road. I burst out of the overgrown driveway and onto the sandy track without slowing down. I skidded the back wheel around, pointing the bike back the way I'd come, and I pinned the throttle again. I didn't let up. I rode that bike harder and faster than I ever had before or since. I flew down Petticut Lake Road, the engine wailing, sand and small stones kicking up behind me. I didn't slow down until I hit the paved surface of Fence Lake Road. The smooth, familiar hum of the asphalt under my tires was the first thing that felt even remotely normal. I finally eased off the throttle, my body trembling uncontrollably. I was breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep a grip on the handlebars. I pulled over to the shoulder, killed the engine, and just sat there, my head bowed, listening to the blood roaring in my ears. I looked down at my bike. The left foot peg was just a jagged stump. The mirror was gone, its mount bent at a weird angle. Scratches and smears of green sap covered the gas tank and fenders. My jeans were torn at the knee, and I could feel a trickle of blood from the cut on my cheek. It was all physical proof. It had really happened. I kept glancing back down Petticut Lake Road, half expecting to see that dark, upright figure emerge from the trees and start running after me with that impossible ground-eating speed. But the road was empty, quiet, normal. The ride home was a blur. My mind was replaying those 2 seconds over and over again, like a broken film reel, the way it moved, the sheer power, the dark shape against the green. It wasn't a bear. I'd seen bears. They don't run on 2 legs like that. They don't have that kind of build. This thing was built like a linebacker, but it moved like an Olympic sprinter. The thought that it might have been a young one, something that wasn't even full grown, flickered in my mind and made me feel even colder. I didn't tell my parents. What would I have said? I saw a big, hairy man thing running in the woods. They'd have thought I'd hit my head or was making up stories. I just said I'd wiped out on a trail, explaining the broken foot peg and the scratches. They bought it, but I knew what I saw. That image was burned into the back of my eyelids. For weeks, I had trouble sleeping. Every noise outside my window at night made my heart jump. The woods, which had always been my playground, my sanctuary, had become a place of dread. I wouldn't go near them alone. I stopped exploring the back roads. The freedom I felt on my bike was gone, replaced by a constant low-level anxiety. It took me years, literally years, before I could even think about going back to that area without feeling that same cold fist of fear clenching in my gut. The memory of that thing, moving with such effortless, terrifying speed, never left me. I'm a grown man now, and I still get chills thinking about it. I still wonder what it was doing there, and what would have happened if I'd been just a few seconds faster getting to that clearing. I never found out, and I never saw it again. And part of me is deeply, profoundly glad for that. Some mysteries are better left alone. Some doors, once opened, you can never truly close again.